Cyberpunk, Shiny and Chrome. 61. Chapter 61. Psycho Hunt. Michael Magos Sobranov. The sun had already begun to dip as I reached the washed-out diner in one of the forgotten corners of Watson's Northside Industrial District. Fat Larry's was a squat building, with dust-stained windows that barely reflected the few still functional flickering lights within, and only a pair of regulars seated at the counter waiting to be served their cheap chow for the day. The doors squeaked on their hinges as I pushed past them, drawing curious eyes that quickly became cautious and then fearful as heads dipped away from my attention. Not so the eyes of the squat, wrinkled woman standing behind the counter, who only scowled as I passed her by and made for the back, where my employer for the day was waiting. Detective River Ward looked worn, his sole organic eye sporting black lines underneath, and his breaths came long and haggard. The man had been awake for longer than a day. "Detective," I said in greeting and removed my helmet. "Been a while." He snuffed out his cigarette and looked up. "Magos, I honestly didn't think you would take the job." "Jones made it interesting," I said, taking a seat across him and engaging my knees so as to not crush the cheap bench. "You agreed to her condition?" He exhaled, absently reaching for another cigarette and offering one to me. I refused with a hand, not caring for the taste and unwilling to inject nicotine into my brain to get the full experience. Ward lit it and took a long puff. "She can have the suspect so long as they are taken care of." The commissioner was all too happy to take her eddies for the bounty. He exhaled a cloud of smoke. "As for me, I just want to stop the murders." 9 dead already, was it? 10 as of an hour ago, Ward corrected grimly. "High-caliber handgun shot between the eyes, same as the rest." "And you are still sure it is a cyber-psycho?" It sounded far too clean. "The MO should rule it out." He nodded, "but the victims are too random for a serial killer. I thought I had it narrowed down to lone people in alleyways yesterday, but then 3 died at the same time and in the open right next to the local supermart." He probably knew what he was talking about, or at least I hope so. "And you confirmed it is the same killer?" "The bullets all had identical barrel markings." He flicked me the images and scans. I hummed in thought and realized the waitress had walked over to us. "Anything you'd recommend?" I asked the detective. "The burgers are pretty good." "Then I'll have 3. I turned to the waitress. "To go." "Fine," she said and walked off. "Charming lady," I quipped as she left earshot. "What if all this is just a maelstrom intimidation campaign?" Ward shook his head. "They would have made it clear it was them." "That's true," I agreed, thinking over potential scenarios for a while before speaking again. "You think they are building up for a rampage?" "I hope we catch them before that," Ward muttered, "because all the signs point to it. The build-up phase, when they are still not completely broken, could prove exceedingly useful for Regina's project if we get him before the snap." I thought and nodded, getting up to my feet. "Well, we definitely won't find out anything sitting around here. Do your people have the body secured?" He seemed to briefly age a few years at that question, but just nodded instead of answering. Knowing I'd get an explanation soon enough, I didn't press and walked over to the counter just as my order was finished and wired the price to the waitress and moving to leave. "Want one?" I asked as we stepped out. Ward seemed a bit surprised but shook his head. "No, I already ate." "All right," I shrugged and tossed the burger into my maw, packaging and all. We didn't bother driving to the scene of the crime as Ward had chosen our meeting point only a minute's walk away. And as we rounded into a trash-covered alley, I realized why he looked so exhausted. The only thing that made it resemble an actual crime scene that happened literally just an hour ago was the warning tape stretched out around the corpse. A corpse that had obviously been turned over multiple times and searched for anything of value the moment it was left unattended. And what's worse, there was not a single NCPD officer in sight. Ward had been thrown to deal with this whole thing on his own. But I kept that revelation to myself right now and instead approached the corpse, a young man, barely older than me, dead before he even realized what was happening. "No cameras," I noted as I scanned the alley. "First thing I looked for," Ward confirmed. "And the spree near the mart," I pressed. "Broken, all 4 of them." He spat, irritated. "It's like they have a 6th sense for these things." After our last experience with a psycho, I would honestly not discount the idea, I noted dryly. The shudder that went through Ward's back was impossible to miss. So what's the plan then, detective? I spoke up after staring at the corpse for a while. I doubt there is much we can learn from this unlucky fucker. Nothing you can detect? He asked. Jones did say you had some impressive scanners. Nothing beyond the bullet wound, sadly. I shook my head. But that does give me an idea now that you mention it. Can you point me to where the shooter stood? He nodded and waved for me to follow, leading me halfway through the alley. He shot from here and then escaped that way, he said, pointing at a wire fence surrounding a dented metal door. Has at least one cyberarm up to the shoulder. I muttered to myself and then activated my left optic spectroscope. Chasing after this one was turning out to be a bit more challenging than the simple cordon I had to deal with last time, but the little kid in me found it all kinds of novel. Still, novel or not, one only got ahead in life through copious amounts of cheating. And so I narrowed my detection range to the filth and trash around the spot the shooter was in, and then compared it to the less visible tracks surrounding their escape route, some tweaking later, and I had a trace. Come on this way, I said, and began following. Ward quickly caught on, and his steps became more certain. So, I said as we twisted through the third filth-covered alley, the gold-marked footprints I was following starting to slowly fade. Who did you offend to end up with this assignment? What makes you say that? Ward tried deflecting. Come on, detective, I chuckled. This kind of case is not something the NCPD would give enough of a fuck about to assign to someone of your rank, especially with not even a single deputy to watch your back in a gang war-infested area. He cringed. This is a punishment detail if I ever saw one. Ward exhaled. Can't just leave it well enough alone, huh? I won't demand you tell me. I shrugged, refreshing the trace with a new layer of detritus the target seemed to have picked up from a pond of filth. But I will admit I am curious. He was silent for a while as we kept following the trace, before ultimately answering, I punched my lieutenant in the face. I couldn't help but huff. That would do it? Arsehole was asking for it. He muttered, what kind of a self-absorbed monster brags about selling off an evidence stash of glitter to a high school? Blink. What? You get why I did it then? He seemed to perk up at someone finally sharing his reaction. You were incredibly stupid to punch him, I said, making him immediately start turning crestfallen even if he tried to hide it. But I wasn't done. You should have killed him quietly and hid the body. I sagely nodded. That way you both punish him and open up a way for your promotion if you play your cards right. That wouldn't be true justice, and this isn't about advancement. He scoffed, sounding both offended and relieved at the same time. I'm not going to turn my job into some corpo rat race. That isn't why I joined the force. Ward, I don't know how to tell you this. I spoke slowly, but the NCPD is a branch of NICORP. You are already in the rat race whether you like it or not. You may accept that state of affairs if you like, he refuted, but I do what I do to make Night City a safer place. Consider this, then. I decided to play the devil's advocate, despite my respect for his determination. How much safer could you make Night City if you were at the top, making all of the decisions? His sole organic eye widened at the idea before he quickly hid the reaction behind a scowl. Wordlessly, I agreed to drop the topic, and we resumed our pursuit. The tracks, even if I used powerful scanners to access them, were already old by now. An hour was more than enough for someone to leave the city. If they were coherent enough to consider it. Someone with only half their mind, though. Not a chance, and whatever sense or luck that had kept them from being found finally failed them as they left the alleyways for the open street facing Kabuki, and directly into the veritable sea of cameras watching over the area. I raised a hand for us to stop as we nearly walked into a crowd and focused on the net. Before the minute was out, I found exactly what I was looking for. He passed through here 9 minutes ago. Ward's back straightened. You are sure it was him? Instead of answering, I flicked him the details. Will Rogers, 30 years old, and appeared on multiple quick-draw shows before a series of unfortunate events ended up with him losing his career and his family in increasingly gruesome ways that practically screamed of a setup. Perfect recipe for a snap. Everything fits together, Ward said, sounding relieved and eyeing me with a flash of respect for finding what he failed to. But how do we find him in this crowd? He didn't even bother mentioning the idea of calling for reinforcements, practically because he wouldn't get them, but probably because the man didn't want to give the target more time to kill any more innocents. Oh, don't worry about that. I smirked, showing just a bit of teeth. Now that I know what I am looking for, he can't hide from me. My cyberdeck churned, promptly bouncing hundreds of ping.exe applications across every block surrounding us. 17 seconds later, and a sole red outline appeared in the distance, right in the middle of an open-air food court. One that was filled to the brim with people trying to recharge after a long day of work. Once I informed Ward of this, he cursed, "Fuck, we need to get there yesterday." "Don't scream." I deadpanned, and before he realized what was happening, I had thrown him over my shoulder and leapt over the crowd, scaring the absolute shit out of a bunch of people, but paying them no attention as I cleared the road just before a wave of cars rushed past me. Thankfully, the commotion had drawn the attention of the people on the other side of the road, and they quickly cleared the way, letting me dash straight through and saving me precious seconds. I was one leap away when the red outline began twitching and the man started walking to the crowd. To give credit where it was due, Ward didn't sputter or curse when I set him down. Instead, he grabbed his pistol and rushed the stereotypically cowboy-looking brown-bearded man. A cowboy-looking man with a rather preem-looking revolver, I noted. He also had only the cyberarm, a pair of optics, and what looked to be a lung replacement in his body. What a pathetic cyberware affinity. "NCPD," Ward shouted over the din, drawing all attention to himself. "Drop the gun and put your hands in the air." The man startled, and for a moment it looked like he would actually listen. But then I saw his eyes glitch out. "You won't take me." He snarled and started drawing on the detective. It was impressive in a way, watching a man snap fully both on the net and in flesh space. It was as if all the signals his implants achieved perfect synchronicity with the rest of him, only to completely overwhelm him in the next instant, sending wild signals directly into his brain in a way I was 100% sure was not intentionally programmed in any way, and making him move much faster than he was moments earlier. How interesting. My finger twitched. The shotgun blast echoed loudly, sending anyone inattentive enough to miss Ward's call-out crawling on the ground as the EMP shell struck the cosplayer dead center, sending him sprawling and knocking him out on the spot. "You know, Ward, ambushing is a valid tactic." I drawled as I passed the stunned cop by. He broke out of his stupor quickly enough. He was going to shoot someone. "Correct," I nodded. "Probably someone called River, I'd wager." He scowled, but I noticed him slightly puffing out his chest. "Better me than them." "Ha," I huffed. "I almost believe that, detective." As I threw the subject over my shoulder, I saw a group of 5 tiger claws crawling out of their cover. Their weapons were lowered, but I noticed their leader looking at the two of us with narrowed, calculating eyes. Yeah, I wasn't dealing with that right now. Immediately, I sent him a quick reminder of just who I was, and got to watch in real time as the poor fucker's eyes widened and he quickly told his people to back off, letting us leave without disturbance. "That was odd," Ward said, watching after them wearily. "It pays to have a reputation." I shrugged. "Come on, we should clear out." A few minutes later, the two of us had made some distance away from the scene. "Finally." Ward sighed. "I thought I would be chasing a ghost forever at this rate." "That's what happens when you don't want to play the game," I told him, "but all is well that ends well and all that. Jones got what she wanted, and you get bragging rights to save your ass." "Ha!" He laughed just a touch bitterly. "I wouldn't have been able to do a thing on my own." He shook his head. "If you weren't here just now, I would probably be rushing to another crime scene just so I can call in MaxTac. This little fucker barely even qualifies as a threat." I tossed the man on my shoulder lightly. "But if you don't want to rely on me again, you can always just get some better implants. That thing in your face must be 50 years old at least." His hand absently twitched for his eye. "It works perfectly fine, thank you very much." "You keep telling yourself that." I smirked and saw my van drive itself into the side street we're standing in. "And there is my ride. Be seeing you, Ward, and do get some rest." "I'll try." He snorted lightly, and as I turned to leave, he spoke up again. "Be proud. You saved a lot of lives today." Part of me probably was. I said nothing and simply gave him a backwards wave before tossing the subject into the back of the van. Now then, it seemed I had finally reached my human experimentation phase. How terrible was it that I could only feel excitement at the idea? 62. Chapter 62, Cyberpsychosis, the First Step. Michael Magos Sobranov, the lab Regina had secured for the project, was an out-of-the-way thing, located in the basement of a failing cosmetics clinic that was kept in the black by the fixer herself. Thankfully, I did not need to interact with the owners or their employees, as another entrance was conveniently positioned on the side of the building. Well hidden, but leading directly into the basement itself. At least the security measures were considerable, and this time I didn't even need to hack through them, as I was for once provided with all the access and control codes in advance. The space within was sufficiently clean and sanitized, but I could immediately note signs of poor organization, with the different chemical and medical supplies being shoved onto the many shelves haphazardly and seemingly without rhyme or reason. And then there were the obviously salvaged implants and implant components shoved into boxes, and a smell of antiseptic that seemed to have seeped deep into the concrete itself. The lab proper was slightly under-equipped for my tastes, with only a couple of high-grade freezers and a duo of Ripperdoc chairs that at least seemed to have been cleaned up thoroughly on a regular basis. And one of those chairs was currently occupied by a snoring, middle-aged woman. She looked to be lacking all but the most basic of modifications, but a quick scan disabused me of that notion, as I found that the vast majority of her internals, all of them save the stomach, had been replaced by life support cybernetics, and not of a particularly high quality either. So this is to be my assistant then? I frowned briefly and shook my head, hefting the subject on my shoulder and placing him on the other chair before securing him to it with the conveniently placed straps. What? Which is just about when the woman decided to wake up. She didn't even bother getting up from her seat, merely looking me over and whistling. She wasn't kidding, huh? You seem very at ease, I said as I finished making sure the subject was well positioned and turned to face the woman fully. If you aren't the one Jones sent over and still got through the security, I'm fucked either way. She shrugged and tossed a chewing gum in her mouth. Name's Yelena. Margos, I returned. She had you working on this for long? She shook her head. Just a few months. The last doc she had on the job decided it was all a waste of time, and the Eddies wouldn't convince him, so I've just been waiting around for the most part, twiddling my thumbs. And what can you do, aside from taking care of the subjects and making sure they don't croak before their time? I asked. Subjects, eh? She tilted her head and snorted, You are one cold chrome fucker. Should I humanize the mass murderer instead? I deadpanned, to which she raised her arms. Hey, no need to convince me of anything. Used to run with the scavs for a while before Jones decided I was more useful doing some. That was as far as she got before my mechadendrites unfurled from behind me, positioned like hissing snakes as I glared down at her, just barely stopping myself from drawing my handgun on her. Regina must have had a good-ass reason to keep her here, despite my history with the gang. Why the fuck would you tell me that? Are you asking to die? I asked, despite myself. Yelena's eyes were darting wildly at the sight of my added appendages, but surprisingly she managed to calm herself quickly and answered with only a slight tremor in her voice, hands still kept up placatingly. She said you'd find out sooner or later anyway. And she was correct. I nodded coldly, but that still doesn't tell me why I should not gut you on the spot, much less trust you with my work. Because I was shit out of luck and trying to survive. She turned paradoxically calmer with each word spoken. And Jones has enough shit on me to bury me alive if I backstab her and make me thank her for the mercy. So what? I should tolerate you because you will keep your mouth shut. Don't stand there pretending your hands are clean either, Doc. She scoffed. I did what I did to survive. You are about to cut a man open like a fish just to see what makes him tick. We kept the stare-down going for a while, the nurse bafflingly at ease, while I warred with the truth of her statement and my instinctual hatred for all things scav. The mere idea of cooperating with one of the filth sent me trembling in anger, while at the same time the practical side of me acknowledged she did nothing to me specifically. Ultimately, practicality won over. Fine, I said, and it almost physically hurt me to do so. Regina seems to trust you, so I'll just rely on that. for now. Finally using some of that grey matter between your ear holes, youngster. She chuckled. I felt my fingers twitch and promptly ignored her fishing for information. Don't push me. Or what? I closed my eyes briefly, counted to 5 and pointed at the storage area. Go and get the hard anesthetics. I need to make sure this gonk's ribs aren't stabbing into his lungs. Lethal munitions or not, getting a shotgun shell to the chest was never pretty. Half an hour later, I was looming over the subject, his cyberarm splayed open and leaving the vast majority of its components visible for my direct manipulation. My goal with the first subject was not to cure his cyber psychosis, as that was both unrealistic and impractical. Before I made any actual attempts, I would have to understand the affliction in a deeper, more direct level. Oh, there were definitely many studies on the topic posted up all over the net already, and even a few official ones spread by the corporations and governments accessible to the general public. But they were the most basic of the basic explanations along the lines of exacerbated mental issues and faulty and outdated cyberware, because of course they'd used the genuine medical concern to advertise their new lines of chrome. And what did any of that actually mean in practice? Absolutely nothing. The only solution they had for those affected was to forcefully remove any and all cyberware from their body and shove them into an asylum to live their days out, like twitching, drooling piles of meat and play, pretend there was a chance at recovery. There was no reliable way to predict when the affliction would appear either. Someone with a veritable mountain of chrome, like the case of Maine, could show absolutely no symptoms after years of overuse and poor maintenance, while someone like the subject could have only the most basic of hardware and end up going insane within a year of installation. And I couldn't even say it was corpo anti-competition practices at work because both his optics and cyberarm came from the same Kang Tao branch, which meant the software of both implants was made to play well with one another. Ultimately, it all came down to poor cyberware affinity, and that was definitionally something I couldn't measure, at least until I went through a downright industrial amount of bodies and narrowed down all indicators to a pedantic level, but that too would be highly impractical. Not to mention the certainty of ending up on the nasty end of an angry mob of furious killers. No point in brute-forcing it now. I muttered, let's try a different approach. My artifacts began methodically reassembling the cyberarm as I monitored the signals the reactivating limb sent to the brain and received in return. Handy little fuckers, ain't they? Yelena whistled lightly from across the ripper chair. Supremely, I agreed dryly. The woman had proven to be a passable assistant so far. She gave me everything I needed without me having to call it out first and was always ready to provide assistance with a near unnatural calm and perfectly still hands for a fleshling. It was like I got access to something I never realized I needed, and I'd probably end up missing while doing my usual work. I could see why Regina kept her around, despite her distasteful past. But I sure as hell wasn't hiring her myself anyway. If I ever decided I could use an assistant at home, it would have to be someone respectable. Someone whose head I wouldn't be tempted to crush beneath my boot. The mere idea of bringing a scav near my mother, reformed or not, sent bile that didn't exist rising up my throat. While I was rambling within my mind, a picture had started to assemble from my scans, both within and without the subject's body. A mental command had his neural link poke his brain in such a way as to move his cybernetic fingers, and I was only partially surprised by the sheer speed of the signal as it transferred from the slightly swelled brain into the cybernetic almost instantly, much like it did during his snap. Did the psychosis permanently increase his connection to the where, or was it an overall increase in affinity? I considered before murmuring, a maladaptation then. A good first hypothesis. Just then, the signal coming from the brain seemed to scramble on itself, and the subject's optics snapped open, an incoherent scream of confusion and rage ripping from his throat as his rapidly glitching optics zeroed in on me. I knew for a fact he was still completely unconscious, and yet he seemed to be coherent enough to try and grab for me, only stopped in the attempt by the bindings securing him to the chair. And just as the swelling implied, the parts of the brain governing the physical subconscious and certain memory centers are being hyperstimulated. I mused while looking over the struggling man, a devolution of a sort to preserve the body from a threat it can't quite identify. Too early to tell, probably. My curiosity only grew as the subject seemed to begin adapting to his situation, activating other parts of his brain and slowly dragging himself fully awake as he realized he couldn't simply leap at me. But I also noticed the swelling and heat around the brain starting to increase considerably, rapidly reaching dangerous levels that would leave the subject brain dead within minutes. I decided to cut the experiment short there, forcefully shutting down each and every piece of cyberware with the gentlest quick hack I had on hand. For a moment it seemed as if that would be enough, but the subject still kept struggling, even if more weakly, and so I injected him with another dose of coma-inducing chemicals, and he finally fell back into full unconsciousness. Next to me, Yelena looked completely unperturbed, merely checking on the binding on her end before asking, "Should I be worried he is going to try something like that while you are not here?" "Probably not," I said, "but don't sleep in the same room and lock everything just in case anyway." Again, she showed no real reaction to something most would consider to belong straight in a horror movie. "Sure thing." I gave the subject another quick look, feeling a flash of relief as I saw the swelling on the brain reduce, but not completely disappear. I'd probably have to cut his skull open and really get into his brain to get a real picture of what was going on. But I could still extract a mountain of data from him before I moved to that one-off test. Monitor the brain specifically and send me daily reports. I'll be back within the week to run another round of tests. I decided, and can you do me a favor? Depends on the favor. She shrugged. Can you activate your heart's manual mode and bump it a few times? This time she seemed to actually grow concerned. Hey, I ain't participating like that. If you or Jones think I'll take that shit, you can fuck right off, dirt or no dirt. How annoying. Don't worry, I just need to compare something real quick. It will take a literal second and it isn't like I can check on a flesh-to-chrome interface myself. She narrowed her eyes. Nah. I'll give you 1,000 eddies. I barely kept the sigh down. Done. She smirked and immediately did as asked, even getting confirmation about my hypothesis on the smoothness of the subject's increased connection with his cyberware failed to fully remove my irritation as I wired her the agreed-upon sum. I couldn't even be properly pissed, because that is exactly what I did. Just make sure the subject doesn't croak. I finally sighed, and organized the supplies properly if you would, Yelena. The storage room is an embarrassment. Sure thing, Doc. She mock-saluted. I'll give the boss woman the good news. What good news? I paused, genuinely confused. She blinked. The fact you seem to have made actual progress and aren't crying how it's impossible. That counted as progress. I just stared at her for a long moment before deciding it wasn't worth the processing power. You do that. Something she was more than happy to get right on as I finally left the lab and made my way to my van. Instead of immediately going home, I sunk into the driver's chair and turned up the volume of the radio PEBKAC station while reaching for a cold beer. The odd music tinnitus made seemed to be a brand of its own, almost exclusively appearing on this specific radio station, and as much as I hated the fact it was mostly just maelstrom slop, I still couldn't stop myself from listening. The layered sound design was simply more engaging with senses this sharp. Maybe I should try mixing the music I actually liked in the same way. Could prove to be an interesting hobby. While I mused on just how to make the perfect monstrosity of sound with my preferred melodies, I began scrolling through my non-critical notifications, mostly consisting of messages and reports, and my automated system informing me of my next patient accepting today's reschedule for a minor discount. But then my eyes landed on a particular line of text, and I felt a wave of hesitation pass through me before I steeled myself and mentally clicked the hacked trauma team report. And what I saw left me feeling rather empty. They did everything they could, but they got to Nicholas far too late, and they were unable to fully salvage him from the incident despite technically bringing him back to life. The corporation still counted it as a successful rescue and resuscitation of a platinum-tier client on their reports, but his brain was simply left without air for too long and had not yet adapted to the freshly installed cyberdeck in his head, and the fight with my demons was far too intense, leaving him brain-dead after the fact and unable to live without constant care. A human doll, more dead than alive, and kept that way just long enough for Arasaka to realize he wasn't of any use for their investigation. I shut the notification off, swallowed the shredded beer bottle, and floored the gas. A long ride sounded great right about now. 63, Chapter 63, Cybergonks and Future Stonks. Michael Margos Sobronov. Hours passed as I aimlessly drove across Watson, doing my best impression of an emo teenager and staring off into the distance, or as close to it as I could considering I was at most times surrounded by buildings covered top to bottom in eye-watering neon signs. I knew I was acting the gonk and wasting my time thinking about could-have-beens, but I needed some time to just let myself process without people asking me bothersome questions. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure if I was actually shaken by the death or if I was merely acting out in a way I believed I should because of my own self-perceived guilt. Emotions were really fucking confusing sometimes. Thankfully, as I began contemplating smashing my head into the dashboard, out of sheer dumb frustration, the world provided me with a distraction. I slammed down on the brake, twisting the wheel so hard the metal groaned and drifting my van sideways with a loud screech of tires on asphalt, just in time for the speeding car covered in scavenged metal armor to zoom past me and slam into an overfilled trash container. The engine sputtered a rapid and rather final death, though by some unholy miracle it did so without detonating into a massive fireball. The familiar music blasting at full volume and the many flashes of red dotting the heads of the occupants made their identities pretty obvious, and for a moment my hand moved to the control panel of my autocannon. But I quickly stopped myself, "You fuckers aren't worth the shells," and simply grabbed my shotgun before stepping out. At the same time, the maelstrom driver had hopped out and was drunkenly hollering at his co-driver, not even acknowledging my existence. "Damn it, Jimmy, think you can make this tin can run again? We'll miss the mosh pit." "Boom, man. At this point we might as well just get a new one," the twig of a cyborg across him said in a dead tone and patted the car, muttering something about his poor baby girl. "Fuck." Boom, smacked the top of the car. Only my growing amusement stopped me from blasting them into pieces, which gave enough time for the third and final member of the exemplary maelstrom specimens to roll out of the car face first, slurring out a curse and clumsily rolling on his back, only to still like a deer in headlights as his 9 eyes landed on me. The glow in his optics increased dramatically. "Oi, bossman." He slurred and hiccuped. "What in the ever-loving fuck did you put into our drinks again?" "Wonderboy's newest and most premist mix," said Bossman said proudly and started turning. "Why do you ask?" Naturally, his pride disappeared the moment he was met with my crusher pointed at his center mass. But the fear and aggression I was expecting was nowhere to be found as the gonk actually swayed on his feet before reaching over and shaking Jimmy's shoulder so he would look as well. "Dear Webb, we are in heaven," was the thin cyborg's elucidating reaction. My right optic twitched. "Kindly cease projecting your cyber fetishism onto me. It is quite uncomfortable." They didn't seem to register me speak for a moment before they realized I was in fact not a hallucination, and the shotgun pointed their way was very much real. They all startled away a step or two, though surprisingly none of them reached for their guns. Probably because all of those guns were still in the car, but one should never underestimate just how stupid gangoons could be. "Well, I'll be," the boss exclaimed, his arms spreading jubilantly, "if it isn't our own local Smashman." "Smashman? How flattering." The third yet unnamed member of the group slumped on the ground again, ass first this time, while Jimmy suddenly squealed like a girl and began walking over to me like some kind of frenzied zombie. "Eee! I'm your biggest fan, man. Can you sign my faceplate? Come on, man, the bitches will love it." Before I even realized it, I had taken a worried step back and would have probably shot Jimmy's head off if not for his boss handily yanking him back and tossing him behind himself. "Sorry about that." He chuckled. "These gonks are high off their asses on the premiest fucking glitter in this scrapyard of a city." "And you aren't?" I allowed myself to calm down a bit, though my gaze refused to leave the half-feral Strommer behind him. "I got a detoxifier installed exactly for shit like this." He shrugged, voice turning more coherent by the second. "Don't want us committing suicide by big fuck-off Borg when I can help it. Name's Boombox, by the way." He offered me his hand. I looked down at the hand covered in God knew what and didn't return the gesture. "Margos, but something tells me you already knew that." "Doubt there's any fuckers in the gang who don't after your rampage." He snorted, seemingly not caring about my ignoring him. Most Nova shit I've witnessed in fucking years. Right. So what was the plan here? I allowed myself to relax a bit more, shouldering my shotgun and crossing my arms. You wanted to what? Scrape some of my paint off in revenge? We would never, Jimmy shouted in outrage, to which the silent third member just face-palmed. Revenge? Boombox blinked and then threw his head back and laughed. Chumbata, we were just fucking joyriding around, didn't even know you were there. He pointed at my van. That fuck-off tank you are driving around was damn near invisible. My eyes twitched sideways, and I quickly realized what happened. Get better optics, meat. Ha! He barked out another laugh. Damn right I should, but pickings have been slim since Powerpump got his ass samurai'd and upgrades are coming slow. Think you could set me up with whoever did you? Looks like custom made. I didn't even need to consider it for a moment. No. Giving high-ranking Tiger Claws access to my stuff was one thing, giving it to fucking Maelstrom was something that would only ever happen over my dead fucking body. Boombox twitched in annoyance, which quickly drew me from my asinine line of thought, but he quickly stopped himself from showing it and raised his hands placatingly. All right. Fair is fair, Choom, was just asking. Don't see shit that preem in NC without some big fuck-off corpo holding the leash. Right, I drawled slowly. Fair is fair. So, he trailed off. You looking to join up? Bosses will probably skin my ass if I don't ask. Fuck, big borged-ass fucker like you could probably become the boss in like 2 days tops. He paused. Don't tell them I said that, by the way. Right. Like I'd ever associate with them willingly. Bosses, I caught onto his slip instantly. He twitched slightly before quickly correcting it into a shrug. You know how things get when the streets are on fucking fire, especially when the big bastard's brain chrome starts rusting and they decide they are the big Borg and it's their way or the scrapyard's way. He clapped his hands. So what do you say? Want to free yourself from all the meatbags pretending they're worth shit and join your true brothers? I just stared down at him in complete, utter disdain, saying absolutely nothing and letting my optics speak for me. His shoulders slowly slumped. Yeah, that's what I expected, he muttered with a nod. Well, that about drained all desire. I had to blast them. How disappointing. I've wasted enough time on this. Try not to suicide yourselves too quickly, I said, and promptly turned to leave, ignoring the 2 sags of relief and the loud wailing of the third. I failed to hold down the shudder as I shut my doors, and the chrome cultist began crying out for me to come back, promising he would be good and beautiful for me. Something told me he was only stopped from bodily throwing himself on my windshield by the fact the third maelstromer had literally sat his ass on top of him. What a bunch of fucking weirdos. Still, I was grateful for the distraction, so they got to live for the day. They'd probably just end up killing themselves sooner or later anyway. I rolled my eyes as I looked over Rita's most recent message, that being a particularly risque picture of the Mox twins sent as thanks, with no other explanation. It wasn't all that surprising they managed to piece things together, as I wasn't particularly subtle with how I went about freeing the tiger's merchandise. But beside the slight thrill of satisfaction I got from the knowledge, I will admit I also felt a bit worried. Because if they could deduce I was the one to free the girls from Shobo's businesses, they could also deduce I worked with the Tiger Claws to get rid of the subhuman in question. But aside from a simple warning to not trust the gang from Rita, which was perfectly understandable considering the reason she was so cyberized was previous encounters with them, there was no other mention of it. No, instead the Moxes were far too busy trying to get me to come for a visit so I could get my proper reward through increasingly creative and suggestive means. The fact they started trying to convince Rebecca into joining the celebration after my first refusal as a way to get around my excuse of already being in a relationship was almost as annoying as the fact the little gremlin was egging them on just to fuck with me. But I was ever an old-fashioned pillar of chrome, and so they would just have to content themselves with simply thanking me and moving on with their lives. I had work to do anyway. I decided and promptly ignored the group chat as I leaned under the slightly too low entrance to Vic's clinic. A large metal box filled to the brim with vials of grey goo held in my hands. I should really put a bell on one of these days. the Ripper said without turning as I made my way inside, somehow noticing me despite the fact he was currently occupied with installing a heart replacement to an old woman. Why do you think I shoved the door while entering? I said, need any help with that? No need, Mike. I'm just about done. Vic chuckled lightly. All right, I shrugged. Where do you want me to put the meds? Just place them under the workbench, he said wryly, like every other time you asked. Don't get cheeky with me now, old man. I tutted and quickly did as he asked, noticing that the crate I brought him previously still had some vials left inside. Biz slowing down, I asked after making sure everything is in order. Hmm? He went to look up but stopped himself. No, everything is going pretty well here. I'm just keeping the supplies for when they are actually necessary. No point in wasting them. I went to speak, but he preempted me. Also, I told you what you give me is more than enough. Well, I was around, so I thought why not bring some anyway? I smirked. He fake huffed and asked, Misty still busy then? She's got some ancient grandma asking about her grandson's futures. I tuned her out somewhere around the part she started wailing about all her sons failing in life and having to rely on their kids for the family now. I huffed, how she can tolerate talking to people like that for literal hours I'll never understand. Misty is a treasure neither of us will ever comprehend. Vic chuckled before drawing my attention to his patient. Think you can give her a quick scan? Just in case. Knowing what I'd find, I still did, so everything seems perfect, Vic, even if the heart is lacking. It isn't a combat model, Mike, he said patiently and began stitching the woman up. It doesn't need to be perfect, just functional and affordable. Affordable doesn't mean it isn't overpriced for what it does, and designed to fail in a few years besides. I failed to keep a bit of annoyance from bleeding into my voice. That shitty model isn't worth $5,000, much less the 20 they are asking for. Why not do something about it then? Vic asked suddenly, and the easy way he said it almost made me miss the implication. What exactly do you mean by that, Vic? You are an artist with the chrome, Mike, he told me as he started injecting the stitched-up woman with heal boosters. And your nanomachines still look like techno-magic whenever I use them. What are you getting at exactly? Your work has already helped a bunch of people. Hell, there have been dozens I've managed to save just because of what you gave me. He paused. But, what? I cut him off. Do you want me to start selling the nanites openly? You do realize how stupidly suicidal that is, right? If you'd let me finish first. His voice turned just slightly stern, and it was more than enough to make me bite my tongue. I was going to say you could help a lot more people if you used your brilliant mind to make the affordable and efficient life support implants you yourself would approve of. I will admit, the idea wasn't terrible, but there were still some obvious issues to it. So what do you want me to do here? I frowned, wisely ignoring how my spine straightened at the praise, open my clinic up for the crowd and waste my time fabricating pacemakers. You know exactly what I mean, Mike, Vic said, and finally rolled his stool around to face me, his gaze a challenging one. It was pretty obvious even at first, but for some reason the mere concept of it felt dirty, antithetical to even my meager morality. It felt like selling my soul to even say it out loud. But I knew from Vic's look that he wouldn't let me ignore this one. You think I should start a corporation? I voiced hesitantly. Yes. Vic nodded, and seeing my eyes crinkling, he pressed. You know, just because the megacorps of today are soulless monoliths doesn't mean you shouldn't create something amazing simply because you'll be associated with them. You are smarter than that, Mike. Exactly the same thoughts I had while I was staring down the Corpo Academy mere days ago. Apparently, I am no less a sheep than the rest of the masses. How low the Margos has fallen just because he's hit a tiny little snag. Yeah, no. Fuck that. Hesitation is death, and so is stagnation. And I plan to live for a very, very long time. But how to go about it? Without realizing it, I had begun muttering to myself, I'd need to get enough leverage not to provoke any of the megacorps into doing an aggressive takeover, probably get direct support from one of them and offer a bribe of some kind to the higher-ups. Security is also a must, and so is logistics. Vic, clearing his throat, drew me from my rambling and I looked up. I see you've decided then, he said only a bit teasingly. Yeah, I exhaled before chuckling a bit. It's definitely possible. Possible. He raised an eyebrow. You sound like you already know exactly what you need to do to get there. I'd even bet you've already decided to do it. Ha, I huffed. You know, Vic, you are right. But I have one condition. He raised his eyebrows expectantly. When I do finally manage it, you are getting recruited, whether you like it or not. He immediately frowned. You know I'm happy where I am. But you can do a lot more good by helping me out, now can't you? I grinned as I threw his words back at him. So what will it be, old man? His frown remained for only a few seconds before it disappeared behind a proud smile. If that's what it takes, kid, it is a sacrifice I'll happily make. No backing out now. I'll hold you to that, old man. 64, Chapter 64, Tunes and Calls. The Mystic. The patient smile remained on her face even as the old woman shut the doors to her esoterica a bit harder than was polite, yelling and cursing how she was never coming back to her scam of a business. For the fourth time this month, Misty let out an exasperated sigh and began rearranging her cards and candles, carefully snuffing the latter out for reuse. Not even a minute passed before she found her smile returning and turned to the rear entrance, just as a much lighter-feeling Michael walked inside. Looks like I was right then, she said just a touch teasingly. Right about what? The boy, who looked like anything but, asked. We barely even said hello before you shooed me away. You were scaring poor old Miranda, Misty said coyly, and whatever was weighing you down, only Vic could help you out of it. He remained silent for a brief while before shrugging his shoulders and sighing. Ha. You know, Misty, you don't sound nearly as mysterious as you think you do. She just kept smiling at him. But you are right, he admitted. The old man set me straight, and I know what I need to do now. Seems like you don't really need my help then, she said cheerfully. Sorry. He chuckled, leaning against the nearby counter while making sure not to crack it with his weight. I'll try to keep the life-defining decisions to a schedule from now on. No need, she shared his amusement. But since you are already here, can I interest you in a reading? She knew his refusal before he even voiced it. Like clockwork, he firmly shook his head. I do appreciate it, Misty, but symbolisms and vagaries aren't what decides who I am. Only I can do that. Oh, very well. Go and ruin all my fun then, she pouted, slowly shuffling back the 3 cards she had drawn while waiting. The Chariot, the Magician, and a final one she would not look at without permission. Still weirds me out how easily you can read someone as expressionless as I am, by the way, Mike said after a brief lull in the conversation, pointing an accusatory finger at her. Almost makes me think there is something to your wacky guru speak. Maybe there is something to it after all then, she said teasingly, knowing he wasn't actually trying to insult her passion. But I can't make a believer out of someone who refuses to open their mind. Well, I am sure we can debate how right either of us is for hours, but I have a better idea of how to spend our time, Mike said with a shake of his head before his posture turned serious. How is my mom doing? You've talked to her a few times by now. Ah, Svetlana. The firmest spine this side of the States and the most unyielding. Her demeanor was almost as impressive as it was frustrating. Misty was just happy her friend survived. Everything else was a bonus. She is doing surprisingly good, Misty replied honestly, and after only a small moment of hesitation. I thought taking revenge would ruin her, but it looks like it gave her a new lease on life instead. That good. Mike nodded to himself a few times before directing her with a questioning look. Right? Probably. Probably. She is moving forward instead of letting the past weigh her down. Misty assured, it's just usually not this simple. Tends to blow up in people's faces, doesn't it? He voiced. To which Misty silently nodded. He stared off to the side for a moment before exhaling. So long as she is feeling better, I'm not going to worry about what should have happened to those weaker than she is. Noticing her tiny frown, he immediately added, not that I'm saying they deserve to suffer, just that I'm not going to drive myself insane to spite our luck. That's usually a healthy way to look at things. Misty smiled, momentarily relieved. Besides, she has more to live for than just getting her revenge, so you just make sure to keep yourself safe and she will be perfectly fine. Of course, he nodded. Even if I get scrapped, I'm not making her aware of that fact. She gave him an exasperated look. "Not my point, Mike." And his serious expression disappeared behind a slight smirk, his golden optics shining with mirth, practically saying, "Got you," on their own. Before they could go on, the many bells and chimes on the door rang out, and Misty felt a familiar warmth as she turned to see a grinning Jackie Wells. Michael Margot Sobranov. I ignored the brief flicker of something odd in Misty's eyes as Jackie approached her and swooped in for a big hug, looking away to give them some privacy as the two got properly reacquainted with each other. Not that they took too long. "Oi, Mike," Jackie called over only a few seconds later, approaching me and swinging widely for a hard handshake. "Don't tell me you turned shy while I wasn't looking." I caught his hand and ignored his wince as he was nearly tossed back by the sheer weight of my chrome. "So you don't want to be given privacy then, Jack? I'll make sure to remember that for the most inconvenient moment possible," I teased. He chuckled, failing to hide a wince as he rubbed his hand. "Yeah, well, not too many people give a fuck about that stuff. Still, appreciate it." He waved it off. "But forget about that. I haven't heard from you in a bit. How you been doing, you big death machine?" "A week isn't that long," I huffed, "but well, I've been all over the place for a while, but I'm pretty sure I'm all right now. No sudden and inconvenient accidents chasing me wherever I go, at least, so I haven't stepped on too many toes. Yet." He made a wary chuckle. "You joke about scariest shit, AZ." "Joke?" I asked, momentarily confused. He gave me a look and shook his head. "I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear a thing then." Misty laughed to herself. "Don't worry, Jack." I patted his shoulder. "If I ever start getting chased, you are the first I'm calling over to catch bullets for me." "Obviously," he said without a hint of irony. "Well, damn, I can't even fuck with him after that." "You two want anything from the vending machine?" I asked. "I'm good, thanks," Misty said, simply tossing a fresh tea bag into the steaming cup of water she had been preparing while we talked. "Get me a trailer brew." Jackie decided just as quickly. "Got damn addicted to the stuff recently." "I'll have to give it a shot too then," I chuckled, "and probably check if it isn't actually addictive." Instead of getting annoyed or worried, Jackie just shrugged. "What isn't?" Which, fair enough. It didn't take me long before I for once actually paid for the drinks, as the machine belonged to a local business instead of a megacorp, and returned to find the two of them whispering to each other, pointedly making sure to ignore it as they began discussing Ms. Wells' downright foul reaction to finding out she was dating Jackie. How anyone could hate on Misty like that, especially someone I've come to consider a sweet and caring old woman in Guadalupe Wells, I could never understand. But apparently the woman got it into her head that Misty was no good for him and was refusing to budge. Definitely explained where Jackie got some of his truly gonk moments from, though, that was for sure. I made sure to clink a bottle against the doorframe to make my approach heard, and the duo quickly separated, even if some tension remained on their faces. "Here you go." I tossed him the bottle, and we quickly raised a silent toast to each other, Misty following along with a mock salute of her cup. "So Big Mike," Jackie said. "Big Mike?" I said incredulously. "Met a guy in Watson, goes by Tiny Mike." Jackie grinned. "Lil guy helped me out with the lay of the land, so now you're Big Mike." "Right." I felt a tiny part of myself die then and there before suddenly remembering something. "Wait, you wouldn't happen to be talking about the afterlife merc working for Regina? That Tiny Mike?" "Ha, he told me you knew him." Jackie pointed at me. "Oh, you could go as far as to say I know him intimately." I deadpanned real deep. "Ayo?" It was Jackie's turn to be incredulous. "I did sew his guts back inside of him after all." I finished. Jackie choked before staring up at me with pretend annoyance, grumbling in Spanish as he did. "Speaking of your work in Watson," I took the chance to follow up, "how is your runner doing?" He moved on easily. "Bug is great. No bullshit with her, just biz and eddies. Managed to flatline a couple of strommers that got the drop on me. The smell was fucking awful." "She does that consistently?" I asked. But Jackie shook his head. "Nah, she had to push herself to fry them. Really knocked her over too. So pretty solid so far, but not an elite. Factory resetting select wear is usually better to outright frying them if she is lacking capacity." I said after some brief thinking, "She might want to switch to those if she lacks a high-end cyberdeck." "What, like turning their limbs off?" He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. More like temporarily glitching them, but essentially. I nodded, waving my hand about, much quicker and lets you kill them with guns without wasting RAM that can be used on other stuff, less heat on the brain too. You probably know what you're talking about there, so I'm just going to trust you. Jackie chuckled. But how the hell am I supposed to tell her that? Oh, my other netrunner Choom told you how to do your job. He scoffed, like that's going to go over well. Just tell her you heard it from Margot's. I said bluntly, that ought to convince her. Jackie looked at me like I said something incredibly stupid. But Misty patted his shoulder. Just trust him, Jack. I do trust him. Jackie grumbled and looked back up to me. Still doesn't explain shit. I'm pretty famous on the net, I shrugged. It is as simple as that. Right. He trailed off before shrugging. Well, whatever. Either you are right or Imma looked like a gonk for a few minutes. That's the spirit, I clapped my hands. He narrowed his eyes. You just thought I looked like a gonk no matter what, right? I have no idea what you are talking about, I smirked, though plating your guns with gold is usually an indicator. Oi, you take that back right now. The ex-Valentino stood up with fake outrage, and we began a mighty debate on his taste, or the complete and utter lack thereof. Inevitably, I was the winner, no matter what Misty said. But just as inevitably, the two of them left for their date, and I for home, not before I finished my drink though. And would you look at that, Jackie was right, trailer brew really was addictive. As was custom by now, whenever I had free time and wanted to think, I was sat atop my balcony, staring off into the hubbub of floor 16, pondering my next move. And no matter how much I detested the idea, I came to a simple yet unavoidable conclusion. If I really wanted to make it big in the future, I would have to abandon this place. It simply wasn't large or secure enough to be useful as the base of a corporation, and no matter how one twisted it, staying as a permanent tenant of Night Corp would make me look weak and invite vultures to annoy me into insanity. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it wasn't like I was going to be moving tomorrow, or even soon, so I'll just enjoy the familiarity while it lasts. And having a reserve base of operations never hurt anyone. Before I could keep lamenting the inevitable, a familiar tune began ringing through my agent. And after the caller's display of idiocy, it could only ever be set to the Bushido main theme. Jugo, I said, already feeling my proverbial blood pressure spiking as I saw the grin on the scarred man's face, and immediately knew this was going to be irritating. What is it this time? So cold, my street samurai, he bemoaned. And here I thought to invite you to a party. Uh-huh, I nodded blandly. And what kind of party are we talking about here? Oh, you know. He shrugged. A meeting of family and friends. There will be drinks, music, and fights to the death. It isn't really a party, is it? I deadpanned. Wheel. He trailed off. No, it is a tiger claw meetup between all the captains and the head. I'm trying to scrounge up some reinforcements because the maelstrom is giving as hard as they get. Would you look at that? I drawled, your oh-so-bold strategy is backfiring already. My sarcasm slid off him like so much air as he shrugged, never hurts to have more soldiers. And like he was talking about the weather, he added, also my dear O'Carson has been asking about you and is expecting to see you. Totally not ominous. Wakako should take greater care of her expectations then. I huffed after hesitating only briefly. Tell her if she wants to conduct biz, she can always just reach me directly or through the other fixers. Neither Regina nor Rogue are particularly skittish about sharing Merc info, so I'm not sure why she is using you as the messenger here. There was no missing the amused gleam that entered his eyes as I spoke. Also, I'm already in too deep with the TC. I continued, if I appear on your party, I might as well just stamp your symbol on my arse because everyone will consider me joined to the gang anyway. That is true. Jugo nodded without even a hint of deception. What? So what was the point of all this? The man shrugged. Okar-san wanted me to call you over, and so I did that. So wait, I narrowed my eyes, gesticulating with my hand, even if I knew he couldn't see it. You want to tell me you tried to set me up just because you didn't want to say no to your mother? Correct. Jugo's grin only widened. I sighed. Yeah, you know what? That's completely valid. The man smirked and was just about to throw his head back in laughter, but then I added, didn't your wife tell you to stop trying to drag me into this shit anyway? Do I need to call her again? His laughter died in his throat as his eyes snapped back down. Oi, don't wish that kind of evil on me. I barely survived last time. And I'm sure that had nothing to do with the shredded back. I deadpanned, enjoy your party, Jugo. He smirked, but I ended the call and huffed, like dealing with a fucking child. Still, even if he was being his usual insane self, it was good to establish a proper boundary with the tiger claws. I wouldn't want him or anyone under him to start presuming my membership, because if they did, I'd have to start disappearing them just to make a point. And that was just plain old tedious. Not to mention bad for my profits. I voiced dumbly as I realized I was still pretty damn annoyed at the madman. Tell you what then. I smacked my knees and stood up. I'll show you street samurai, you fucking weeb. Time to get me a proper weapon. 65, Chapter 65, The Lady of Westbrook. Michael Magos Sobranov. It was barely morning when the expected message blipped its way onto my agent. Rogue, got a contact request about you from Wakako. Old woman is being pretty insistent about it too. Ironic. Magos, and what do you think is making her insist? It took her a few seconds longer to answer than I expected. Rogue, my guess, she wants to get a better read on you. Magos, that's simple. Rogue, you've been rising your rep around Watson and the rest of NC for a while, kid. Not to mention you are her kid's personal ripper, trusting him to keep a read on you is just not enough for her anymore. Magos, rather paranoid of her. Not that I'd do otherwise if I was in her place, but it needed pointing out. Rogue, you don't stay in this biz for as long as she has without sleeping with your eyes open. Wakako built a dynasty on it. Magos, reasonable. Think I should go pay her a visit then? Rogue, ignoring her is just going to make her cranky. Just remember, if you want to tell her to fuck off, don't be too loud about it. Magos, or she'll have to put me in my place, yeah, I know not to act the gonk. Rogue, you'd be surprised by how often it happens. Magos, I've learned to temper my expectations of people's intellect. And you are right, best get it out of the way instead of having to constantly worry about it. Your discretion is as always appreciated, Ms. Rogue. Rogue, it's my job, kid, even if you've been acting more like a client than a merc recently. Magos, you say that like it's a bad thing. She didn't bother answering because we both knew the truth. One high-profile cybernetic operation netted me 3 to 10 times the cut I'd get from the usual big gigs Rogue could offer me. And while I preferred to keep my skills sharp, I could easily do that with simple smash and grabs and scav hunts, or the less explosive but just as important hacking gigs she threw my way from time to time. Mercs were most effective when they were running the edge, when they had real skin in the game and their very livelihoods hung on their success or failure. It was exactly circumstances like these that made them throw themselves against impossible odds time and time again and somehow manage to get out alive. I simply did not fall into that demographic anymore, or I never did with some hindsight. And if I was being honest, I preferred it that way. Merc work was survival, with your only hope at the end of the road being to leave a good story. My art would make me thrive instead. The call came only a minute after I stopped messaging with Rogue, and I answered without hesitation. Ms. Okada, how can I help you today? The old woman, a mildly wrinkled Japanese grandma with some vitality still clinging to her, really crinkled her eyes. Quite cheeky of you, young Michael, to ignore my invitation and then pretend like nothing happened. Magos while on the job. Ms. Okada, if you please, I corrected calmly. She sighed in exasperation, and the mask of it was so perfect, if I didn't know the woman to be one of the coldest people in Night City, I'd have probably fallen for it. Oh, very well, Magos. I think it is high time you paid my parlor a visit. There is work to be done, and you are the perfect man for the job. Not going to elaborate on that. Some things are better said face to face. I will not waste your time, she said simply and ended the call. My eyes immediately narrowed. Petty fucking hag. I huffed an exhale and signaled my van to drive itself in front of the mega building and grabbed my newest prototype weapon. Fine, let's see what you want then. The Jig-Jig Street of Westerbrook's Japantown district was a special kind of hive of decadence, even for Night City. Nestled between a number of business centers and outwardly posing as a large marketplace, but being a red-light district in truth, It was the place where a large chunk of the city's whores and degenerates gathered on the daily, and all under the ever-kind, watchful eyes of the Lady of Westbrook. She could have made herself at home in one of the better nightclubs, and it would have been perfectly understandable, but for reasons that baffled me, she stuck with a pachinko parlor as her base of operations. The noisy gambling machines would have made me go insane within a week, and that is not counting the constant excited hollering of the gamblers themselves, perpetually trying to out-yell each other. But it seemed the old widow was made of sterner stuff than I, because she was only separated from the parlor proper with a simple black beaded curtain, preventing no noise from reaching her office. The first thing that came to mind as I ducked my way into the office was that Wakako was kind of tiny. I don't know why I thought that when most people were tiny relative to me, but it just refused to leave the forefront my mind. The second was that there was not a single guard in sight, and that sent more of a message than any amount of posturing webus with katanas ever could. "One moment, dear?" She raised her hand while resuming her call. "Yes, yes, I will make sure it is delivered as we agreed, Carlos. Goodbye." She ended it and placed the phone on her table before looking up. "Ah, Mr. Magos," she said, showing no outward reaction to my appearance and waving for me to sit. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Looking down at the leather chair, I shrugged and took a seat as offered, finding myself rather surprised I didn't need to lean forward not to break it. "Tea?" she asked. "No, thank you." I refused with all the politeness I could muster. I'd much rather we got down to business as quickly as possible. "Very well then," she nodded, letting the silence rest briefly before speaking. "You've been the talk of the town for some time now. My dear Isamu just won't shut up about you, and neither will his brothers or the other captains." "He definitely has his moments," I said, eliciting a brief flash of emotion in the woman's eyes I dare call fond exasperation. "My pride and joy," she agreed dryly, "just like the rest of his brothers." "And speaking of his brothers," I leaned in slightly, "why would they talk about me? Anyone with good sense would at least mention someone with your level of cybernetics suddenly appearing in Night City." She pointed out patiently, "And that is without talking about your other skills. Skills that are growing notorious in certain circles." "True. Sensible, really, and yet your tone suggests that isn't everything." "And you would be right." She hummed. "You also played a big part in the Totentans debacle, and it wasn't something that is easily forgotten, especially among the Tiger Claws." "Was that their angle?" I kept my face pointedly blank. I was merely a contractor in Jugo's employ. Anyone with a brain knows this. "And usually that would be well and good," she said lightly before turning serious, "if not for the fact you were not the one to keep them together after pulling my son out of the fire. I literally told them he survived and they should stop being gonks." I deadpanned, as was my job as Jugo's doctor at the time. "They won't see it that way." She informed me, "The story around the fight has already spread across the entire gang, and not without its embellishments." "So what?" I frowned. "They are getting pissy because they got outshined by someone outside the gang." "Correct." She offered me the tiniest nod in turn. "They see a powerful outsider having too much authority with the Western branch and demand you be brought to heel. Foolish and short-sighted from them, yes, but they are all hot-blooded young men, so it's to be expected." "So much for my guarantees as an associate." I scoffed to myself and quickly moved past it. "And you've no doubt called me here to offer a compromise?" "Quite astute, young man." She not quite smiled. "The solution is quite simple. All you need to do is make a sufficiently public display of working for me, and everything else will fall into place." "Yes, I did hear something about your rumored connections to the gang," I drawled, letting just a bit of my annoyance out. "And they will be satisfied with just that?" My words drew a tiny flash of amusement from her. "You just leave that side of things to me." She waved down lightly. "I'll make sure they don't bother you so long as you don't do anything else overt." I grunted. I'd almost call the solution elegant, if not for one detail. Seeing her raise an eyebrow, I explained, "What will your help cost me?" If not for my powerful optics, I would have missed the briefest frown appearing on her face. "You seem to be misunderstanding something here, my boy." She leaned forward and all subtlety disappeared from her face as she stared me directly in the optics. "You've already more than paid for my assistance." The fact you also made sure my idiot son didn't kill himself by trying to take revenge on Arasaka makes me the one in debt, not the other way around. I paused, frowning. I was duly compensated for both of those. She actually smirked, then, how about you let an old woman be emotionally compromised when it comes to her family, instead of acting tough, hmm? If that's how you want to play it, I said slowly, keeping my eyes from narrowing despite my racing thoughts. Was she trying to assure my loyalty to her son through an emotional angle? Or did she acknowledge there was no way for her or the gang to actually control me in the first place and was merely pivoting to something salvageable? She was not being completely sincere, of that there was no doubt. Did it matter in the end? Probably not. Minutely shaking my head, I spoke up again. But you still need me to make a display of loyalty, right? Oh, don't pout at me, child, she said, knowing damn well it was getting under my plating. This is just the simplest solution to a growing problem, and we both know nipping it in the bud now is much better than having to deal with it down the line. Less headache for everyone involved. You aren't exactly wrong, I admitted with a click of my tongue. What do you need done? Good, I had heard you were a reasonable one. She smiled thinly. There is a small group of tigers who have insulted my authority. All of them are gathered around an old basketball court a few blocks away. I need them turned into a warning. A display. I hummed. It was as simple as it got. And them being tigers won't raise eyebrows. They know their place, Wakako said calmly, but sometimes a reminder is necessary. So a mix of intimidation aimed at the central tiger power in Westbrook, a display that I was under a higher power, and a punishment aimed at her own son for his daring assault in taking the prestige of controlling me right from under him. What a devious woman. Fine, I said after a brief silence. Will that be all? There is another thing. She said, a long-term contract. I'm listening. You are to quietly protect my son and his family for the duration of the conflict with Maelstrom. The fixer said, for which you will be compensated €200,000 a week. Quite the sum for something I'd do anyway, I thought before catching it, and another slap on Jugo's wrist she can keep in the proverbial chamber. My eyes narrowed ever so slightly. I'm afraid I am already engaged in a long-term contract with the client in question, so I won't be accepting any new entanglements at the moment. She didn't so much as twitch at the refusal, merely raising an eyebrow. Oh. Quite. I nodded and got up. I'll go beat up your gangoons now. She did not stop me. Finding the disgruntled tigers was as simple as taking a short stroll. The gonks, in what I could only ascribe to a terminal case of the stupid, didn't even bother hiding themselves or moving somewhere else, still squatting on their turf, despite all of the signs pointing to them being fucked. Before long, I found myself approaching a large abandoned half-ruined school, and the 16 men and women, teenagers really, squatting around said school's basketball court, huffing glitter and drinking without a care in the world. I did not know what they did to draw Wakako's irritation, and I frankly did not care to look into it on the information packet the fixer provided me with. The only thing that concerned were their combat abilities, and I found them thoroughly lacking, which is why I didn't bother drawing my guns as I approached them, a long, thick metal bat crackling with electricity hanging from my right hand. They noticed me immediately, either jumping onto their feet or trying to stumble up, depending on their level of inebriation, and their leader, a young woman with no visible chrome, stepped out. "The fuck you want, Clanker?" she cussed, which only made me blink and tilt my head. "Really? That's the best you've got?" "Yeah, bitch," she flipped me off. "This is our turf, so you can fight right back off to whatever little shit heap you crawled out of, or we'll turn you to scrap." Well, there went the final tiny bit of empathy I still had for them. Shit, I know this gonk. One of the more drugged-out tigers pointed at me. He's that fucking death machine from Watson. No shit. The boss woman blinked before, in all her intelligence, showing no fear and looking back at me just as haughtily as she had been at first. "What the fuck are you still doing here?" "You annoyed Wakako." I droned out the necessary performance, and I'm here to break you for it. "Well, you can tell that shriveled-up old fucking bitch she can go and is as far as she got before I blasted forward with all my weight and instant momentum. artificial muscle coiling with explosive force as I blurred at her, right arm swinging down on her head and bursting it like a ripe melon as the crackling electricity of my bat exploded outwards, harmlessly washing over me and leaping into the many implants of the other goons. The sudden makeshift EMP left them screaming and convulsing, and completely open to what came next. My bat swung out to the right, braining another gangoon, as one of the others managed to recover and quickly drew his katana in an attempt to rush me. My left thermal claw ignited before he even realized what was happening and cut through the blade with a satisfying ting, gouging the man's face and chest and ending him painfully. The others fared no better. The few errant bullets bouncing off my plating and barely even denting my coat as I methodically bashed my way through them. Really, the greatest damage I took was the realization the bat was just not as useful as I had hoped, ultimately ending up launched into one of the fleeing tigers, crushing his spine and impaling him into the cement. The rest, I proceeded to simply punch or claw to death. And just like that, 16 lives disappeared for my convenience. Seems like I was already in the corpo mindset. Minutes later, a word-for-word story of what occurred was spreading in the ranks of the less idiotic tiger claws, and Wakako informed me I did well, depositing a solid 30,000 eddies onto my account with a message of, "For the inconvenience." A moment later, what a fucking chore. Tsk. I clicked my tongue and flicked the power switch on the bloodied EMP bat. Proper name pending, stopping the crackling electricity from jumping about the jutting studs spread all over the 3-foot-long metal head. It was meant to be a simple solution and a proper middle finger to the sword worshippers, but no matter how much I changed or redesigned it, it just wasn't clicking. Even with my ability to outright ignore the weight constraints with my cybernetic strength, any actually usable version was just too damn unwieldy to give me what I wanted from a melee weapon. The EMP gimmick was my final attempt at making it practical, but even then I had shotgun shells that did the same thing, and that was without mentioning my net running. Also, as the pest control job had proven, my hands were more than sufficient ambassadors of blunt force trauma, making the bat part of the weapon completely redundant. Oh well, I sighed in defeat and tossed it on the pile with the rest of the failures, back to the drawing board. 66, Chapter 66. Forearmed. Michael Margot Sobronov. As much as I may have wanted to tinker the day away, the realities of life were as always cruel and uncaring, and I had a full workday to go through before getting to the good stuff. Not that I particularly minded, as I programmed a subroutine to search around for extra useful tidbits about melee weapons for me while I worked. Just imagine how much easier compiling information would be with an internal assistant, I thought as I methodically inserted carbon tubes into the opened-up neck bones of my current patient, and as soon as the thought occurred, I had to forcefully stop my hand from twitching. Yeah, no, an actually useful assistant would need to be low AI at least, and that sounded incredibly retarded. One mistake with an AI, and boom, you are no longer dealing with an intelligent minion there to give you all the answers you needed, but its self-evolving data abomination of a cousin, composed of all the worst things the whole of humanity could comprehend. And as if that wasn't enough, said cousin had an almost absolute tendency towards patricide. Still, though, I considered as I began stapling the man's throat back together, just because something is incredibly fucking dangerous, it shouldn't stop me from using it. If I am intelligent about it, I could probably make some kind of dumbed-down, shackled version that would still be useful enough for my needs, with enough effort. Damn it. I sighed, my hands and dendrites not wavering for a second. So much for not taking stupid risks. I'll just add it to the list, and hopefully tomorrow's me won't be as eager to compete for the next Darwin Award. Wisely, I decided to drag my focus away from highly suicidal projects and fully immersed myself into helping my Tiger Claw associates free themselves from the weakness of their flesh. I'd expected the orders from the gang to start slowing down after the first rush of rumors, but the gang war made sure I had as much work as I wanted to do at any given moment, even if the increase in volume came from the lower-ranked gangoons who lost bits of themselves in the fighting and needed replacements. Most of them couldn't afford me, but still did well enough that they were rewarded with a session under my knife instead of going to a subpar ripper by their bosses. Jugo and his higher-ups still paid through the nose for all of it, but it was nowhere near the earnings I'd get from the truly wealthy clients looking for quality of life upgrades. It was a bit funny, in a morbid sort of sense, how a liver powerful enough to filter suicidal levels of drinking netted me around 40 times as much as subdermal armoring that could stop mid to high caliber rounds consistently did. Even for the Tigers, luxury still won out over their warrior's pride in the end. But I wasn't complaining. The money was flowing into my accounts, and if I kept to even half of my current workflow consistently, I'd have enough starting capital to get things moving as soon as next year. Not to mention all the scans I was gathering would inevitably come in useful with the cyberpsychosis investigation. Combat was a constant source of trauma, and prolonged combat doubly so, which meant I got to watch in real time how cyberized tiger claws changed under the pressure. And how much quicker would that happen with an AI helper? I could almost see it. But now was not the time for daydreaming. I was already in negotiations with Regina, Rogue, and now Wakako about expanding my business to fresh, high-profile clients and currently haggling over the fixers' commissions for the recommendation they could give their mercs. Both Rogue and Wakako had seen the results of my work, but they were old hands at the business and were naturally trying to rob me for all I was worth while still appearing somewhat on my side in the process. Which was just not happening, so any kind of agreement was taking its sweet-ass time. Once they realized I would simply keep going and rely on my growing reputation instead, they'd fold easily enough. Regina, on the other hand, was far more reasonable about things and quickly accepted taking a small cut for introductions. Both because we had proper rapport with each other and she was trying to keep me in the cyberpsychosis project as best as she could. She knew I wouldn't chicken out just like that. But extra motivation was never a bad thing. Unfortunately, Regina also had the least number of truly wealthy clients, so while helpful, I could not depend only on her with my expansion. And speaking of expansion, I frowned as I looked my clinic over. Things are definitely going to get too chaotic for just me to deal with. Even just the scheduling sounded like a massive fucking nightmare. I'll be needing that assistant sooner rather than later, it seemed. But how the fuck does one find someone trustworthy enough for the job in Night City? Finding competence was after all incredibly easy. One only needed to take a look at the ex-scav Regina had saddled me with to know that much. But trust? Might as well look for fairy dust at that point. A touch too cynical, even for me. I mentally chided myself, knowing for a fact there were trustworthy people around. They were just understandably outnumbered. I finished connecting the nerves of my 23rd patient for the day with his new limb, sending a slight jolt through his system perfectly calculated to wake him up as his eyes snapped open. The young man who got his lower right arm chopped off by a cutter-matic earlier today looked up at his fresh new limb of blackened titanium with wonder and began wiggling his fingers, somehow forgetting I was even there. "This feels perfect," he exhaled. "Slow down there, Skywalker." I snorted. "You can admire my work later. I need to run some scans now that you are awake, just to make sure everything is perfect." His face reddened, but he quickly nodded and offered me the arm, quickly getting his guarantee of quality alongside a free scan of the rest of his body. Something I offered to all of my customers, no matter their wealth. It cost me nothing, and it never hurt to give the customers time to plan out their next improvement. Still, though, seeing the man's soul leave his body as he looked the scan over and saw a nasty lump in his nether regions almost made me regret it. Just yikes. With a frantic kind of strength, the man stood from the chair and grabbed me by the shoulders and looked up at me with eyes full of mania. "You can fix it, right, Doc?" Only the fact I was 10 times his weight stopped him from waving me around like a stick. "Of course," I said calmly, my artifacts reaching for his cybernetic arm while I removed the other manually. "But nothing is free." "Right." He caught himself, fiery determination in his eyes. "I'll be back." "You do that," I drawled and watched him march off. Poor fucker. I shook my head and looked down on my list for the day. And would you look at that? That seemed to be it. Or it would have been if not for a familiar set of steps deciding to interrupt me. Senko looked like death warmed over as she walked into my clinic. Not particularly tired or unwell, but there was a certain weight with each step that made it clear she was not happy about something. She had been avoiding me for a while, but honestly, after ripping one of her chooms' heads off, no matter how understandably, I wasn't going to blame her. Still, some points must be made. Gangun-chan, I greeted as cheerfully as ever. What brings you to my humble temple of chrome? I spread my arms and then my voice flickered low. Without an appointment? But whatever was weighing her down proved to be more potent than any fear she may have had of me, as she simply sighed. Jugo-sama promoted me to lieutenant. The previous one got blown up by a Stroma cyber-psycho. I blinked. Congratulations? Thanks, she said with all the enthusiasm of a corpse. It was just what I needed. Well, that just about took all the fun out of it, guessing good old Jugo wasn't taking no for an answer. Ha, she sighed, if only it were that simple. What, don't tell me they would go all you insult the captain's honor by refusing his generosity, fall on your sword now. On you if you said no? I deadpanned with crossed arms, judging by the look she gave me that might just be word for word what would happen. I began uselessly rubbing the sides of my head. Fucking… Really? She seemed to find some morbid humor in it at least, as she huffed and rolled her eyes. Why join the shit show at all then? I asked. Sounds like a good way to die. And why did you start working with Jugo-sama? She countered. Eddie's. It was always Eddie's. Touché. I inclined my head. But as flattering as it would be for you to come to me for the comfort of our deep friendship. Her deadpan said it all. I'm sure there is a much greater reason for you coming here. I smiled eagerly and began rubbing my hands. Dear old Jugo might be a dick, but he takes care of his own, so I'm guessing you got a nice fat bonus with your promotion. Enough for a few improvements, perhaps? Yeah, pretty much, she nodded tiredly. Not dying to every random maelstrommer would be great. Fear not, dear Gangun-chan. I grinned, my mechadendrites uncoiling behind me. When I'm done with you, even their bosses will not be able to touch you. With a flourish, I produced a tablet and offered it to her. Here is the catalogue. Take as much time as you need. I'll go get the scalpels ready. Her eyes snapped up to me as she failed to contain a terrified shiver, but she quickly looked down again and began gawking over the massive list on offer, a list with a few entries usually reserved for the friends and family. What can I say? She grew on me. Like a stray cat. The suite of upgrades she ended up choosing was a respectable mix of defense and offense, the usual bone replacement and subdermal armoring, alongside a biomonitor and auto-injector for survivability, and one of my less straining Kerenzikovs for good old butchery. Once more, I will never understand what in the fuck made the core make the baseline Keren a permanent modification. Anyone with even a lick of solid grey matter in their cranium should understand that speeding perception up to such an extent on a permanent basis was plain old stupid, and more often than not, resulted in something approximating a self-lobotomy by the user after enough time. So I refused the basic design on principle and made one that could induce an enhanced zone state on demand. Much simpler and more efficient that way. Before good sense could win out, I tossed the design in the folder of my next Cyberdex blueprints. Mixing the two sounded beyond ridiculous, and once lodged into my head, the idea refused to leave me. But that was a long-term project. I had something much more important to work on right now. Despair. Despair is all I felt as I looked down at the culmination of 2 days of brainstorming, overthinking, and trying and failing to convince myself I could stop the inevitable. How foolish of me. First, I tried doubling down on the bat idea, going for a big-ass hammer with the same EMP gimmick. And it proved almost as redundant as its prototype, only beating it because of the extra reach and more focused weight, but somehow ending up even more unwieldy for a cybernetically paced fight. I could probably crush a mech with the damn thing, but that wasn't the point. I could do that with my mind too, and therefore hammers were redundant. My next option was an axe. An axe felt right, it felt proper. But once more, cold logic won out against the choice. No matter how preem it would look, once you buried an axe into someone or something, you'd have to waste precious moments yanking it out. And the blade surface was too small for my tastes, demanding precision and leverage that sometimes just couldn't be found in melee combat. Or at least not quickly enough. At one point, my thoughts drifted up to that one patient who lost his arm to a budget arms cut-o-matic, and I ended up following that line of logic and built what I dubbed a chain axe, and with some added tinkering and improvements, the weapon proved itself solid and perfectly serviceable for what I needed. rapid armor-shredding cuts, and the disabling of cyberware with a constant cycling EMP charge. A proper can opener. Really, the fact it took me so long to come up with the idea while having the same goddamn weapon in my mouth was baffling. Or it would be if it was no so utterly embarrassing instead. But no matter how much I wished otherwise, the inevitable realization dawned. There was no real reason to keep it axe-shaped when another shape provided far more reach and effective blade surface. The fucking tigers have infected me, I cursed, looking down at the 6-foot-long chainsword in my right hand, its spiked knuckle duster-esque saber guard perfectly fitted to house my fingers and keep my grip solid no matter what. The blade of the weapon, if it could even be called that, was housed under a solid block of metal painted black and red with a stylized golden eye placed above the guard, open only on one end and composed of hundreds upon hundreds of razor-sharp, ultra-hardened titanium teeth that would instantly shred through anything they touched. Well, so long as it wasn't made from a super-dense material anyway. I flicked the mental switch and the machine of death came alive, briefly roaring as the power from my secondary reactor surged through it, before settling into a more constant, relaxed purr. The blade could function on its own for prolonged periods of time, but I made sure I could still charge it wherever I was through a simple connection cable in my hand. Looking up to my usual testing dummies, I made a wide, purposefully misaligned swing with the weapon, and I was thoroughly satisfied by the result. The block of metal, despite being just as dense as the teeth of the sword, separated cleanly, and I scanned only the most minor of dents in said teeth, imperceptible to the human eye. Good. They were purpose-built to be replaceable, but having to replace them constantly would have been irritating. Still, that wasn't all the weapon could offer, and I flicked another mental switch, drawing far more power from my generator and making the previous startup roar a constant as concentrated, violent electricity began dancing along the length of the blade and teeth, ready to latch onto any piece of electronics it touched and fry it from inside out. That the human nervous system technically counted as an electronic was just a happy little coincidence. I flicked the power off and the monster quietened down. It was perfect. Just as whippy as the katana, but also carrying a heft the other weapon lacked. About an infinity times more effective against armor, and it could suffer far more abuse than the strip of metal. Oh well, I shrugged, twirling the war crime around like a kid who had just found the stick. Fuck it, I surrender. Cool swords are cool. 67, Chapter 67, Rebecca Interlude. Rebecca. Bye, Lily. She waved cheerfully as the gun store owner slumped against her counter and held down a cackle, rushing after her tune before she was left behind. So, she trailed and looked up at the heavily cyberized woman. How'd you get tricked into holding shooting lessons anyway? Svetlana looked like she had aged back a decade or 3 overnight. Her expression far more relaxed, her usually simple and utilitarian clothing replaced with more alive merc fashion, and her previously short grey hair now reaching all the way to her shoulder blades. When she asked her why keep it grey when she could go for literally anything else, her response was the most self-assured. Why would I hide how far I'm willing to go for my child? Rebecca most definitely didn't start gushing in amazement, no matter what anyone said. The Sobranovs were metal as fuck, and she loved every second of it. Tricked, Svetlana's amused response dragged her back from memory lane. I was bored, Rebecca, and those kids needed someone to teach them how not to shoot their own heads off. I offered to teach them again after the first lesson, and everything else just kind of clicked together. And Lily just let you, she asked. Mikey and I are her biggest customers. She knows better than to risk losing that. Svetlana explained before smirking and leaning down conspiratorially. Also, she is scared shitless of saying no. Rebecca giggled. One day you two are going to give her a heart attack. Mikey will just give her a new one, the woman declared without missing a beat. Her giggling quickly turned to laughter. But that's enough about me. She said suddenly, Why'd you look for me? Mike locked himself in the workshop again. Rebecca waved, pretending to be annoyed, didn't want to interrupt his tinkering. That son of mine, Svetlana sighed. You should have just dragged him out anyway, ignoring his girlfriend like that. She began grumbling under her breath. Rebecca blinked before smiling wryly. Who even uses girlfriend anymore? Calling me old, Rebecca? Svetlana smirked and shook her head. Also I do. I don't like how the whole input-output thing makes relations sound cheaper, but that's just me being old-fashioned. Huh. Rebecca rubbed her chin. Never thought about it like that. She perked up and pointed up at the woman. Well, if Cybermom says so, then I'm using it from now on. Cybermom? Svetlana raised an amused eyebrow. Rebecca mentally cursed at her nickname slipping out. Svetlana laughed and ruffled her hair, making her look away and grumble just in time to hide her relieved smile. Soon enough, they were back at the apartment, but instead of letting her follow her up, Svetlana gently shoved her towards the clinic. Go drag my son out. He's been in there for 2 days already. Rebecca whistled, nodding and making her way into the clinic before approaching the armored workshop doors. Feeling oddly giddy, she placed her hand on the scanner and felt a flash hit her retinas as the hidden camera scanned her through her optics, and then just like that, the door shunted open without a sound, revealing a complete and utter mess. The fuck exploded in here? She called out, cautiously walking inside. Nothing, came the slightly muffled voice from further in. I just made a tiny bit of a mess. Just a bit, eh? Rebecca smirked before looking the pile of metal bits over for the first time, her eyes widening as she realized she was looking at a small hill of melee weapons. Her eyes immediately landed onto a chainsaw axe. Holy shit, she whispered and immediately picked the thing up. Everything about it was too big for her, from the weight to the grip, but she just couldn't stop herself from testing it out. And so, with all the inevitability of an avalanche, she flicked the switch on, and immediately regretted it. The motor snapped into full throttle instantly, vibrating the whole weapon violently, and due to the sheer weight of it, the person holding it. Not even a second passed before Rebecca let out a panicked squeak and nearly dropped the roaring chain axe, only for a metal hand to suddenly yank it out of her grip, leaving her to fall on her ass. Damn. Did you have to grab the most dangerous prototype first? Mike said in exasperation, flicking the weapon off and looking down at her expectantly. How the heck was I supposed to know that? Rebecca threw her hands up, a pout forming on her face. It was just sitting there looking Nova as fuck. Understandable. Mike nodded sagely, but still, don't just touch dangerous shit like that. Becca. It was a completed version now, but it could have had an unstable engine or something equally bad for your health. You wouldn't leave shit like that on the floor, she pointed out, still pouting. True. He nodded again before catching himself with a sigh. I just don't want to end up scraping half of you off the floor for something completely avoidable. Yeah, that's fair. She hid a wince, but she wasn't about to admit that as she pointed up at him. Ah, but admit it. You'd love for an excuse to fix me. You don't need fixing, he smirked. But I'll admit I would feel much better if you were bulletproof. Her shoulders slumped. You can't just say cutesy shit like that with a straight face and move on. Yes, I can. He fired back without missing a beat. Yeah, she grumbled as she got up. Come here. She gave him a quick hug and mentally thanked him as he didn't mention the relieved shiver that passed through her back. That fucking chainsaw was too close to just swinging down to her legs. Didn't matter if she was literally next to the best ripper ever, that shit was terrifying. Still, you are making me one, she declared after she stepped back. Oh. He blinked. And why would I do that exactly? You probably couldn't even swing the thing. Because it is Nova as fuck, Mike. Come on. She crossed her arms and grumbled. Just think about all the dead scavs. That is a pleasant image. He nodded along. But you are too small for it to be useful. Didn't you say you fixed the whole height problem? She blinked. She was pretty sure she was still growing by a tiny bit. Well, yeah, he nodded a bit too smugly. You are still just naturally short, though. Oh. Her shoulders slumped before she suddenly perked up. Wait, can't you just change that anyway? Yes, he trailed off. Should be pretty simple, actually. Then why? She cut herself off. Because you didn't ask, Gonk. The flash of amusement in Mike's eyes made it clear he knew exactly what was going through her head. So, she caught herself, think about it. Don't push yourself into anything, he said supportively before reaching over to a work table and grabbing what looked to be one of those funny spiked bats some tigers liked using when they weren't swinging their sword-shaped razors around. Don't think I forgot about you in my little fugue, though. I made you this. He offered it to her hilt first. She took the weapon and immediately found it was way lighter than it looked. And after some fun swishing, she realized it had a goddamn EMP field. Thanks, she looked up with a big grin, but the axe is still cooler. Of course it is, Mike snorted. Come on, let's get out of here. I'll clean it up later. He brought an enclosed 6-foot box with him, but no matter how much she pestered him about it, all he'd tell her was it was a gift for a katana-obsessed old fart and wouldn't budge after that. She accepted her defeat for now. Like usual, they ended up in Mike's room after that, binging yet another movie series and criticizing the thing all the way through while chatting away about random stuff between the interesting bits. Well, it was mostly Rebecca complaining about Pilar being a dick and Mike complaining about his messy schedule, but at least they got it off their shoulders. Sadly, before she could get properly comfortable, Rebecca saw a message in her crew's group chat and both perked up and frowned at the same time. Oh, she voiced, gotta go, we have a gig. Well, that's bothersome, Mike groused from his seat under her. Maine usually does unplanned shit like this? She hopped out of her inputs, or was it boyfriends now, lap with a small grin. He's been taking low-stake gigs to train up the new girls. He doesn't do spontaneous on the big stuff. Mike stared for a while before nodding slightly. All right, what about the new girls then? They trustworthy so far? She shrugged, picturing the pair of netrunners. Kiwi keeps to herself, but she's fine mostly. Lucy is a bit of a bitch, but sometimes. She shrugged, but I get she is paranoid about something, so I just ignore it. Kiwi and Lucy, Mike's eyes shone. Small world. You know them? Rebecca perked up. Customers, actually. He shrugged. Only repairs, though. She exhaled. Whew, thought they had some of your bullshit chrome for a second there. My chrome is not bullshit. He groused, but there was no heat to it. Also, you know I'd give you an optimized build the moment you asked for it. I already have it ready, in fact. Oh, she grinned, giving him another hug and a kiss on his cold metal cheek. You are too cute sometimes, you know that? He just grumbled. And seeing him look away, her mirth disappeared. He just wanted to keep her safe, which made her feel warm all over. Tell you what, she said, and he instantly perked up. Send me the list and I'll think about it. It was already uploaded by the time she finished the sentence. This was definitely too much for her poor little heart. She narrowed her eyes. You better be awake when I'm done. And quickly hopped outside, pointedly ignoring Cyber Mum's amused look as she rushed down the stairs. All right, Maine spoke up as all of them except Pilar and Dorio, as both were busy with something else, stepped out of Falco's car. We are trying to start this as quiet as possible, so Sasha, you are on camera duty. Rebecca's chum offered a quick mock salute and got to hacking from the safety of a nearby bench. Lucy, you got distractions, Maine went on. Got it, Kushinada agreed tersely. And Kiwi, I'm keeping you as the backup. Maine finished. Anyone notice me approach and tries shit, you fry them. She just nodded silently. Hold up, Maine. Rebecca called out suddenly, hopping up and down and waving at the big man despite the weight of her armored vest and jacket and her new bat, dragging her down. Aren't you going to get noticed like immediately? It's a big party in there. He shrugged and didn't look too annoyed at the question. It's mostly exos and mercs wasting time, our target's trying to set himself up as the fancy new afterlife. Dumbass straight-up challenged Rogue about it. They're waiting to watch the fireworks. What kind of a dumbass do you need to be to try that in the same district? Rebecca felt her eyebrow rise on its own. And how's that going for him? Kiwi asked blandly. Maine snorted. Rogue let it go on for a few days, just so people could get their free drinks. Gonk's running out, though, so that's his countdown over. And we are the lucky gonks who got the milk run. Poor bastard, Falco huffed from his seat in the car. Well, not like anyone's going to miss him. Rebecca shrugged. What am I doing? Rogue's schematics show there's a well-hidden rear entrance, Maine told her, and she quickly found it on the info shard in her port. I need you to make sure no one gets out. Sure thing, boss man, she mock saluted. I'll shoot all of the fuckers trying to run away from their shitty job. You do that, kid, Maine snorted, knowing she was just fucking with him. All right, team, enough fucking about. Let's get this party started. The rest of them turned just as serious, and everyone moved to their respective positions. "Come on," she grit her teeth as she pulled the dumpster, the expression twisting into a grin as she finally managed to block most of the entrance with it. Heh, she smirked, remembering the image of the target showing him to be wider than she was tall. "Try to get through that, you fat fuck." She leaned back against the dumpster, listening to the echoing gunshots coming in from inside. "So much for trying to go quiet," she snorted. "Didn't last 5 seconds once Maine got in. Too bad the gonks protecting, whatever his name was, had nothing on Maine. They were dead already. They just haven't caught up to the fact yet." "Rebecca." Sasha's voice jolted her from her thoughts. "Target and 2 guards are getting away. They are going in your direction." "Shit." She cursed and rolled into a prone position, her SMG pointed at the door. "Ping them for me." "Can't from this distance," Sasha answered, only for something to buzz against her link and for a trio of blue outlines to appear in her vision. "Got them." Kiwi's cold voice rang out across the connection. "Thanks." Rebecca sent back with an annoyed pout, knowing she'd have to deal with a pouting Sasha later. She squashed any further thoughts as the outlines came closer and closer, the rusted back door getting kicked open by the first bodyguards as the second rushed after him. Rebecca gently pulled her trigger. Immediately the 2 mercs began screaming as the incendiary ammo she got on Mike's recommendation shredded through their subdermals, dragging their deaths out and making them flail around desperately as their fat ass of a boss shoved himself past them, tripping on one of them and ending up falling face first into the concrete. Rebecca deadpanned and decided just shooting the gonk was no longer enough. She let her SMG hang off her shoulder and grabbed her new bat, easily sliding between her impromptu barricade and the wall just as Fatso started dragging himself up. He managed to crouch onto his knees by the time she was in front of him. She grinned and pulled her new weapon back. His eyes widened as he noticed her. "What the fu—" She slammed the activated bat into his groin, cringing as she realized the crunch she heard and felt was more metal than flesh, and she got to watch what an EMP burst did when it connected to a Mr. Stud implant. It wasn't pretty. Jesus fucking Christ, Becca. She looked up to see the blood-spattered Maine looking down at the man with something approaching pity. "Think Rogue's going to give me a little bonus for that one?" She grinned, unrepentant. "Ha!" The cyborg laughed. "You know what? She probably will." She did. They got back to their base quickly after confirming the kill. Maine had the afterlife invite, but since Kiwi and Lucy didn't want to draw attention, he decided against dragging them there and instead settled on celebrating in their little bar, breaking the drinks out in the dingy little building for the first time since the Biotechnica gig. They all shared a cheer, but soon enough everyone relaxed and separated into small groups. Kiwi sat in the corner, sharing a quiet beer with Falco, but not showing any particular interest towards whatever the man said from time to time. Lucy was trying to make a drunk Pilar fuck off, because of fucking course he made himself home here already, despite not doing jack shit. And Rebecca was stuck dealing with a paranoid Sasha, just like she expected. "You know," she interrupted her tune, "you can just get better with other stuff if you are going to spiral like this every time they do something." "Like what?" Sasha blinked, voice still all sniffly. "How should I know, girl?" Rebecca threw her hands up. "Go learn to snipe or some shit, but you need to relax before you make me smack you." "Since when did you get so scary, Becca?" The netrunner pretend shivered. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Okay, I'll stop thinking about it." Sasha crossed her arms and pouted. "You are no fun. Stop being a gonk and I'll get fun again." She poked her in the rib, much to her protest. "I'll go see what Maine is up to. Want some drinks?" Sasha held down a yawn. "I think I'm going to turn in early." "Nighty, girl." Rebecca gave her a 2-finger salute and walked off, just in time to see a familiar figure hand Maine a plastic bag over in his corner booth. "Yo, Glory," Rebecca waved, startling the red-haired woman and drawing a grumble from the cyborg. "Long time no see." "Hello, Rebecca." Gloria's tired expression relaxed a bit more as she smiled. "When did you get here?" she asked. Gloria gave Maine a look to which he nodded. "Managed to get my hands on a solid sensor implant. Maine was interested and wanted it before I sold it to anyone else." She finished with a slightly teasing lilt, to which the cyborg just rolled his eyes. Preem, Rebecca threw her a thumbs up. How's work anyway? You look half dead up there. Maine decided to grab the bag and retreat to his own world as he realized the conversation had been hijacked. It pays the bills, Gloria answered with a tired smile. Hopefully they will finally give me that quarterly raise they keep promising. Shit, Gloria, Rebecca hissed. You still with those EMT punks? The older woman nodded. Just need to push my son through school. Still don't know why you made him go to Arasaka of all places. Rebecca shook her head. Gloria's response was the same. It was the previous few times. Because I want him to have a future. Right, Rebecca's voice made her disbelief clear. If you say so. She couldn't understand how Gloria could push herself so far just for a far-off dream of her kid making it in the corpo. Actually, scratch that. She was almost like Cyber Mom in that. Moms were overpowered, apparently. She wouldn't know. Hold on a second. A random thought flashed through her head. Didn't Mike say he was looking for a trustworthy assistant? Rebecca's expression twisted into a smirk. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. 68, Chapter 68. Coaching and Poaching. The swordsman. He looked his most willful student over with narrowed eyes and held back the twitch threatening his face before calmly noting, "You didn't bring your sword." Much to his complete and utter lack of surprise, his reproachful tone did absolutely nothing. That tiny thing? The cyborg tilted his head, his smile showing off his maw just a bit. Realized it was too light for my tastes. Don't worry, though. I brought something much better for today. The child made good use of terror as his weapon, to the point the rank and file had already started coming up with foolish stories and epithets about the captain's unusual ally, each more stupid and premature than the last. They were obviously given too much free time if they could waste it like that, but it was sadly not up to him. Iron Asura indeed. Master Takeda thought, though, only half mockingly. Without his prompting, the boy opened the case he was carrying and brought out a ridiculous mockery between a proper blade and a chainsaw, shaped vaguely like an old European straight saber. The swordmaster pushed all of the disdain he felt at the sight into that one simple noise, and then wisely returned his usual blade to the stand, replacing it with a cheaper, more expendable version. "Did you think to surprise me with this thing?" he asked, unsheathing his weapon and taking a half stance. This isn't the first time overeager children thought to replace skill with fanciful toys. The right tool for the right job. The boy shrugged without a care. Now how about you stop preaching and help me come up with a way to actually use this thing without looking like an idiot? Much too willful by far. Takeda tisked to himself, but couldn't contain his curiosity. Very well, let us see if your tool is worth as much as you dream. His eyes narrowed as the boy began twirling it around, like it weighed nothing, quietly staring him down for a few seconds. Then the silence was broken by the loud roar of an engine, and the two charged. Immediately, Takeda felt his hands nearly buckle as he deflected the first strike land on the side of his blade, followed by a loud screech of metal as they quickly disengaged from each other and made some distance. He forced the tremble down, and his eyes briefly flickered to his blade and narrowed as he realized it had been nearly sheared in half by the smallest moment of contact. Those teeth were more dangerous than they first seemed. He wasn't about to admit defeat just like that, though, and just as the boy went to open his foolish mouth, he dashed forward, his katana swiping out and forcing the monstrous weapon down just long enough for him to feint upwards and smack the fool boy's head with the flat of his blade. The cyborg's annoyed response died in his throat as a loud ting rang out across the dojo, the upper half of Takeda's sword bouncing off the hard metal and flying off to the side. The boy broke the stare down first. Right, guess we both proved our point there. Takeda said nothing, merely looking up at the arrogant youth with all the stern pride of a master who knew better. Michael Magos Sobranov. The old fart was way too smug for someone in smacking distance. Just because he got one lucky hit off didn't mean I was talking out of my arse about my chainsword being better than his flimsy little knife. But I knew that if I pointed that factoid out, the little shit would just take it as a win. So I continued practicing in relative silence as he helped me beat the most egregious kinks out of my makeshift style. He did acknowledge the fact my new sword was a very efficient weapon breaker and had me flick the chain off before we continued. treating every full-toothed contact that lasted longer than a touch as a disarm while we sparred. Naturally, I recorded every well-executed attack I made onto my agent for later use. All in all, just smacking the old coot around for a few hours probably helped me more than a full month of gigs would. Fighting someone while you were moving at inhuman speeds was one thing on paper, but a whole different beast in practice, especially if they were spazzing around as much as you were. That will do for tonight. Takeda spoke up suddenly, making me stop my backswing. Your weapon is effective, and you wield it with surprising grace. That sounds almost like praise, I noted as I kicked my case up and returned the chainsword inside. Because it is. Takeda said pointedly, it will make for a powerful tool of terror in your hands despite the clear barbarity of the design. And there it is. I sigh playfully before going still. Did he just, so uncivilized, my ass? My scanners showed no micro-expressions on the old fart's face, but I could swear I saw his mouth twitch there for a second. You're probably just projecting there. I decided, so is Jugo still busy with the waterfront fuck-up? It is being dealt with. The old man responded with complete calm. The Maelstrom counterattack took us off guard, but the captain's advance keeps whoever is organizing them from being able to act as they wish. That doesn't sound particularly certain, I point out. Merely a question of time. He hums, unmoved. Right. I said, so long as they don't bother me with the inevitable fallout, I don't really care. Catch. Takeda calls out suddenly, and I find myself holding a data shard. What's this? I ask, scanning the oddly advanced-looking chip over. A training shard for grappling, modified for full cyborg use. He says, merely the basics from one of the High Rider satellites, but that is the most you will get outside orbit. Huh. I voiced dumbly and looked up. How much did you pay for it? I was owed a favor, is all he says. All right. I trail off. Why? What a foolish question. He hums, and again says nothing else. Smug little shit. Fine, be that way. I huff before adding, thanks, old man. He nods and instead of acknowledging it, further goes into lecture mode. Cyborgs who have mastered their form are true terrors in battle. You would be wise to dedicate yourself to pursuing this mastery. If only I had infinite hours in the day, I grouse. The longest road is started by a single step. He hums, making my eye twitch ever so slightly. But so long as you make the effort, I trust you will manage it. Even that brute smasher did after all. Really? I blink. All the vids just show him blowing everything around him into tiny pieces. Subtlety is a weapon in its own right. Takeda says, there are rumors about which means there is some truth to them, and you seem to lack in motivation. You think just pointing out the cyborg does it will be enough to motivate me? I ask dryly. Smug little shit just stares blankly. Is it not? And I sigh in defeat. Yeah, it is. He hums, totally not hiding his laughter. I believe that will be all for today. Yeah, it's well past your bedtime, old man. I drawl and turn to leave. Thanks for the lesson as always. Humph, he huffs. Well, that was productive. I consider as I step out of the TC base, the guards barely paying attention to me anymore. Now what is this about Becca finding me an assistant? Gloria dead on her feet, Martinez. I'll be fine by myself, Mom. Her son grumbled, it's just a long walk, so supposed to be healthy anyway. If you're sure, she slumped back against the couch, pulling her boy in and kissing his forehead. Study hard, mihijo, and no more getting into fights. I didn't start it, he mutters grumpily. No more fights, David, she repeated harshly. We don't have the money to fight them if they press charges. You know they will look for the tiniest excuse. All right, fine. He crosses his arms and looks away with a huff. I'll keep my damn head down. She narrows her eyes. You better. Just make sure to get some rest, he says quietly before adding a barely audible, love you, Mom, and leaving. The brief smile on her face flickers off as she covers her eyes with her arm and groans tiredly, each passing second tempting her to actually sleep, one of her rare free days off, instead of chasing ghosts. She wanted to ignore Rebecca's proposal at first, but no matter how much she tried, she just couldn't get it out of her head, especially whenever she was elbow deep in some poor soul's guts, rummaging around for parts she could sell just so David could keep going to school in his already worn-down uniform. She lasted for all of 1 week before she decided to give it a shot. It was ultimately a simple question of numbers. Even with her almost constant 16-hour overtime and occasional injection of money from her side job, she was earning 5,000 eddies a month on average. Just barely enough for her and her son to survive, while never fully leaving the red. She feared that if nothing changed, David would ruin his future trying to help her, and that was just not something she was ready to accept. So she decided to take the leap of faith. Just then, her cheap agent rang, and she quickly picked up Rebecca. She mumbled, arms still covering her face. "Is it time already?" "Yup, waiting for you downstairs. Come on, Glory, hurry it up." She wished she could be that energetic. With a force of will, she made herself get up, made sure she looked halfway decent for a meeting with a prospective boss, and rode the creaking elevator down to the ground floor. Rebecca was waiting outside, leaning against an expensive-looking car and grinning up at her. "Is that yours?" Gloria couldn't help but ask. "Borrowed from a tomb." The young woman shrugged and waved dismissively before then waving for her to get moving. "Come on, get in quickly. He doesn't like it when people are late." Briefly frowning, she did as she was told, and moments later they were trailing down the streets of Night City at what she was pretty sure was well beyond the speed limit. Unable to just calmly listen to the music, she spoke up. "So what can you tell me about the job? You were pretty vague." "Ripper's assistant is all the details I got." Rebecca repeated her first pitch with a shrug, keeping her eyes on the road. "Dunno any more than that, but I'm pretty sure you get paid a lot better." "Hopefully," Gloria muttered, "and the employer." Rebecca hummed over-dramatically. "He's pretty serious about his work, but don't let that fool you. Deep inside, he's just a big old goofball." "You still didn't tell me how you know a Ripper," she said after a minute of relative quiet. "Oh, he's my input," Rebecca chirped without an ounce of shame. "Heard him grumbling about needing some extra hands that won't yap about what they see, and then bam, there you were." She kept her immediate thoughts to herself. Rebecca was a good person, she knew that as a fact, but she was also an ex-member of the Moxes, and those had a rather clear reputation, which inevitably left her spiraling in her doubts about her potential new boss. Exactly why she didn't bother giving her notice at the EMT just yet. A few minutes later, they left the car near Mega Building H11 and entered through the main entrance. It was a bit cleaner than H4, but it seemed to be completely the same until they approached their destination. "Are those tiger claws?" she hissed to her mercenary friend. "Oh, them?" Rebecca blinked. "Just ignore them, they're fine." She didn't ignore them, to the point she started drawing eyes with her staring, but for whatever reason, the usually rowdy gangoons just flickered their eyes at Rebecca before shrugging and ignoring them both. They exited the lift and stepped onto the 16th floor, and Gloria immediately noticed something was off. But she wasn't given time to guess at just what was going on, as Rebecca suddenly realized they were starting to cut it close and began dragging her towards an unassuming but perfectly clean multi-floor complex tucked into one of the corners. She would have probably missed it was an actual clinic if not for the sign above the entrance. Probably only does commissions if Rebecca's hype isn't just her gushing over a boy. Gloria thought as SE was pulled inside. The contrast there was even more pronounced than outside, as she was definitely no longer on a lower mega building floor, but something much closer to the NC MedCenter's entry hall. "Come on in," a vaguely familiar synthetic voice called from what she guessed was the actual clinic. "Hey, Mike," Rebecca waved as she dragged her in, leaving Gloria no time to prepare herself for what awaited inside. Standing beside a Ripperdoc chair, holding an Asian man with his chest open, loomed a familiar metallic figure. The same figure that effortlessly got into her head and threatened her not too long ago. The only difference was that this time he was dressed in some odd cross between a red-white rimmed monk robe and a neo-militaristic surgical gown. "You're here. Good." The cyborg nodded, voice completely flat. "You can go upstairs, Rebecca. Mum and Misty said they were having girl time or something. We'll probably be stuck here for a while." "Okay," the merc chirped and hopped outside. "Wait." Gloria turned after her, only to have the doors closed in her face. "Ms. Martinez?" The synthetic voice broke her from her stupor. "If you would kindly fetch the spool of biodegradable wire from the third shelf to your right, we can begin with your interview." For a moment she stood there unmoving, unsure what to even think. But no matter how uncomfortable, needs must. She had no idea how, but she somehow managed to push through the terror she was feeling and robotically did as she was told, which painted a pretty solid picture of how the next 12 hours went by as the cyborg Ripper would give out simple commands, not even bothering to look at her most of the time as he performed what she could only call techno-magic on his patients, before promptly medically resuscitating them and shoving them outside, giving her just enough time to clean everything up for the next patient as he went to fetch the needed parts from his storage room. The customers seemed just as unsure of her presence as she was. But on and on it went anyways. Fetch, clean, greet guests, repeat. She had just finished wiping off the blood from one of the Ripper chairs and left for the reception hall to bring in the next customer when she blearily realized there was no one waiting outside. "Come back inside. We are done for the day." The synthetic voice of her boss shook her out of it, and she quickly listened. "Want anything to drink?" he called out from somewhere. "Ice coffee," she said before she even registered it, and blinked as a moment later one of his odd snake-like limbs deposited a can into her hands. At this point she was too tired to care, so she just shrugged and took a deep gulp. So, the Ripper, whom she learned went by Magos for most people, pointed for her to take a seat at the unused Ripper chair. "What do you think?" "I'm sorry," she asked and immediately started kicking herself. Was the workload too demanding? He elaborated. Immediately she felt a flash of panic. "Can't look too tired now, Gloria," she hissed to herself and forced her eyes to focus. "I'm used to working longer, sir. This was easy." "Uh-huh," the cyborg drawled before pointing at his odd triple eye. "This is a bioscanner." She went still. "Which is why I'm not taking your current exhausted state into account, as that is how you arrived." He went on, as if he didn't see a thing. "And it is why I'm asking you what you think. Can you keep up like this?" "It took some getting used to," Gloria quickly said, "but it was just a normal shift. And working under an AC beat the heat of the sun any day." Magos voiced neutrally and shook his head. "Well, I for one think you are perfectly passable, and your deficiencies will settle themselves through familiarity." He paused and his eyes flashed. "However, before we go into the job offer proper, I need you to understand something." The sudden shift in tone ripped away whatever relief she was starting to feel as she gulped. "Yes? I perform many delicate experiments here." He spoke slowly. "If you leak anything you see while working for me," he leaned in, opening his mouth for the first time, "you will not live to regret it." "Understood?" As one might expect, the fight-or-flight instincts of her lizard brain fired and settled on flop instead, and she immediately locked up. Shit, shit, shit. She began panicking. What the fuck kind of place did I get baited into? "Calm down now, Ms. Martinez." The cyborg raised what she was pretty fucking sure were clawed hands pretending to be normal ones. "I'm not exactly demanding anything more than trust here." She took a sharp breath and nodded. "Of course." She forced, "Becca did say you were looking for someone discreet." "Excellent." He clapped his hands and ignored her flinch. "You pass. Here is the job offer." With no prior warning, her retinas lit up with a line of text, and she would have no doubt locked up again, if not for what she found written out. Paid out severance for her previous job, 12-hour workdays, €30,000 a month to start with, family healthcare coverage, no work on the weekends, and all she had to do was assist with operations and deal with waiting customers. She croaked, "Is this some kind of prank?" "I'm sorry?" Magos blinked. "This." She pointed at her eye. "This is—" "Ah." He interrupted her. "It seemed you were under the impression I'm the usual NC slave driver." He chuckled. "You will find that so long as you do not do anything to Holy shit, he is serious. "Where do I sign?" 69, Chapter 69, Progress. Michael Margos Sobronov. The subject's body made one final violent twitch as the invasive rip scanner, trademark pending, hissed and detached from his exposed brain, or what was left of the poor shriveled-up thing anyway. Well, at least the poor fucker's dead now, Yelena said sarcastically, incidentally voicing my subconscious thoughts for me. Showing no reaction, I skimmed the scan results and mentally hummed at the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Ever since the first session, there had been 6 more flare-ups where the subject attempted to either break himself out or rip my assistant to pieces depending on whether she was present or not. And every single time showed a progressive shift in his nervous system, most notably the brain and the spine. My maladaptation hypothesis was soon proven to be correct, because while yes, the body was attempting to return to some kind of equilibrium by adapting to the cyberware, it was also burning up more resources than it could afford in doing so, effectively rendering the subject completely brain-dead after the final flare-up. A result that was no doubt further accelerated up by extra-aggressive experimentation as I replaced the subject's other fleshy arm with my own cyberarm model to observe just how far the adaptation went. Did the nervous system adapt specifically to the cyberware present at the moment of cyberpsychosis or to cyberware in general? And if so, to which degree? The answer proved to be a resounding yesn't, because this is where things got weird. At first, the arm connected as well as anything else made by myself, but while the added strain on the nervous system remained within projected levels to begin with, after the next flare-up came about the carefully observed software within the fresh limb started to shift, seemingly completely on its own. Most of the changes were completely nonsensical and counterproductive, but to my complete and utter bafflement, there were a few actual optimizations that even I failed to consider while designing the code, and all of it appeared to form seemingly at random. It would have been amazing, mind-shattering even, if not for the fact it was so goddamn frustrating, because there was simply no reasonable explanation. No source of the signal or the code, no matter how deeply I dug into the subject's agent. Was the human brain really just a fancy biocomputer that could learn to speak in code and suddenly decided to upload legible data? Was I dealing with some Blackwall AI voodoo technofuckery? Was the subject merging with the machine to such a deep level he became both? I had no fucking idea. And it annoyed me, considerably. Admittedly, it also had me itching for more, but if I really was dealing with AI fuckery of any degree, I would have to be prepared to deal with it if I poked the proverbial sleeping bear a bit too much. And the only real way to deal with AI when it came to data was another AI. I grumbled in annoyance for a good minute before making the decision and shoving into the back of my head. Have you been appraising Jones of our progress? I asked my assistant. Yeah. Yelena nodded as she finished zipping the subject up in a body bag. She's pretty satisfied so far. She paused and then huffed. Actually, she seemed pretty thrilled now that I think about it. Hard to tell with how she is most of the time. Thrilled enough to procure a fresh subject sometime this year, I prompted dryly. Pickings have been slim, what with those crazy fuckers at MaxTac rounding up anyone with Chrome who twitches at people wrong. She shrugged, but since this poor fucker finally flatlined, I'm sure she'll kick her ass into gear and grab a new one real quick. Sooner rather than later, I hope. I said, I've got ideas. Can't have you losing interest in her little pet project, eh? She gave a crooked smirk. Or is it your pet project now, too? It is exactly what gives me the most money with the least amount of inconvenience at any given moment. I drawled, and I'll thank you to keep any ideas to the contrary to yourself. She gave me an expectant look. Well, where's my thanks then? My base deadpan expression somehow became even more so as the woman just kept waiting, insufferable fucking scav. I ultimately huffed and wired her 1,000 eddies. There, go buy yourself some dignity or something. God knows you could use some. Ah, you know you love me, she mocked, still grinning. Fuck off. I rolled my eyes and walked out of the lab. So they finally decided to back off, is it? I asked, voice carefully neutral. They sure took their time. V put down her chopsticks and gave me a bland look. A higher-up getting massacred without a single trace of who did it tends to make people tense, 3 months of investigation is nothing. She said dryly, I'm honestly not sure if I should be impressed or horrified they didn't find a single clue pointing at you. Ended up cleaning house pretty hard, though, from what I hear. Having a bioscanner handy is pretty useful for removing evidence, I said a bit smugly. And then there was the fact they didn't have everyone's DNA just sitting around in a database waiting to be used. That was logistically impossible. Admittedly, leaving the turd alive was a bit stupid of me, but he wasn't spiteful enough to fight through the pain and leave a clue so all is well that ends well, I suppose. Yeah. No one can fight through whatever the fuck you did to him. She pretend shuddered. Remind me to never get captured by a pissed-off ripper. The aftermath of that makes death look nice. I'm pretty sure you knew that already. I smirked, tossing back the last of my actual noodles with actual meat. What brings you by, anyway? She raised an eyebrow. What? Can't a girl visit her scary-ass Borg tomb in her free time? My resulting look said all that needed to be said to that. She sighed and leaned back into her seat. Yeah, laugh it up. Don't mind if I do. I cut off whatever she was about to say with a deadpan, ha ha ha. Understandably, she flipped me off, but then went on to say, the Emperor has some big project planned for the waterfront, and the constant gang war is starting to make the investors think they can talk back. I'm here to deal with it. So you are here to wrangle poor old Jugo. I tilted my head. What's the project anyway? Are you trying to get me killed? She narrowed her eyes. No, not really. I denied, won't take me much to learn what it is without you help in any case, but you've got me all curious now. Not like I'm going to share it with anyone, not without a lot of eddies getting involved anyway. Which was probably more reassuring than just saying, I won't say a thing to the corpo. She looked conflicted, but only for a short while. Yeah, not like it is a massive secret anyway. They are opening another branch of Konpeki Plaza. They are going through a mass vetting for potential employees. Arasaka's ultra-bougie corpo hotel chain. Trying to milk the fact the waterfront sits right next to the orbital air center then. Pretty much. She nodded. So you see how an ongoing gang war in spitting distance might be a problem. Can't have the realities of Night City bothering the honored guests. I drawled and pointed at her. Hell, part of me wants to believe the decadent little shits would appreciate the show if you market it well enough. Valerie's lip twitched upwards at the mental image. You know what? I can totally see it happening. Fucking rats, I shook my head. Hey. She glared without any heat. You happen to be talking to one of those rats right now. And you wear the title proudly, madam. I pretend bowed, but before I make you rethink your life decisions for the third time. Her eye twitched. How about we get back to your actual purpose here? Right. She was all too happy to shift topics. So can I count on you to help me with the tigers? I gave it some thought, tapping the table as I did. I'd advise against involving me immediately, even if you could afford my rates. Why not? She showed no reaction to the latter bit. Smart. Because if you depend on me for every interaction with the man, he won't respect you. Duh. I told her bluntly, I might have a lot of influence with the local branch, but you've already been dealing with the boss for a while, so you shouldn't have any problems escalating a bit. And you think he will just accept ending the entire gang war at my say-so? She scowled. Of course not. I snorted, much to her annoyance. You have to frame it in a way that lets him have his fun, make it seem like a challenge or something. Madman will probably appreciate a time limit to how many he can kill before negotiations. Her dead look practically screamed, please tell me you are fucking with me. Well, that is if you were given any resources to bribe him along, of course. I added, can't exactly end the fighting at your request without something tangible. My superiors aren't that inept. She said, I've got room to negotiate. And there you go. I spread my arms. Problem solved. It can't be that simple. Well, yeah, I pointed at her. There is also the fact Maelstrom needs to accept whatever peace offer the two of you come up with, but I'm not going to even bother trying to get into the head of one of those crazy fuckers, so you are on your own there. So long as I get the tiger on board, I'm good, she said a bit too quickly. Someone else is trying to push things on the Maelstrom's end, aren't they? I asked with narrowed eyes, and for the briefest moment I caught her going still before her mask fell back into place. What are you talking about? She asked calmly. Completely ignoring her question, I asked, what did they do to piss you off? Briefly, it looked like she'd just refused to answer, but she ultimately decided against it as her shoulders slumped. The insipid little bitch was cheering when she thought I was going to take the fall for the Totentan's mess, cheering. You do realize you could fuck yourself over in the long run by risking things for no gain like this, right? I pointed out. Not if I win. Words of wisdom right there. The two pincer-limbed maintenance drones skittered about the half-assembled cyberleg, far less clumsily than last time, slowly putting the limb back together, or at least attempting to do so, with all the skill of your average NC Ripperdoc, which was a level just shy of utterly embarrassing by my own standards. Deactivate assembly sequence, I voiced, and the two VI-run drones stopped what they were doing and skittered away from the limb and back to the other three prototype models, lining themselves up perfectly and shutting down. Definitely going to need to up their fine dexterity before trying again, I muttered, feeling a mix of annoyance and satisfaction. But progress is progress. And once I perfect the worker drones, I chuckled darkly. Combat models are just one small modification away. Naturally, programming a functional and practical VI for something as complex as cyberware repair and assembly was nowhere near as easy as my usual programming, as I could usually rely on directed inputs from the nervous system when dealing with implants. Oh no, I had to program these little fuckers from top to bottom. It was proving to be an interesting challenge so far. I could have probably already made functional combat models, as those were far less complex, but I was learning as I worked, and any model I produced later would far surpass whatever suicide drone I could make now. Not that they wouldn't be suicide drones as well, but my point stands. Seeing a notification flicker to the edge of my vision, I made sure the drones were deactivated and disconnected, before stepping out of my workshop and nodding at my actually respectable assistant. Ms. Martinez, I said a lot less clippedly now that work hours were done. I trust that Mr. Sanchez was satisfied with his purchase. He was, she said with a fraction of my own satisfaction. He was acting like he hadn't had a breath of fresh air in his life. That is what happens when cigar-burned lungs get replaced with a pair of beyond baseline human ones. I chuckle. He could smoke plastic now and nothing would happen to him, though something tells me he is going to be avoiding contact with any kind of smoke until he dies. She smiles and nods, accepting her usual can of iced coffee I grabbed from the fridge. Gloria Martinez looked like she had aged back a few years now, that she had consistent rest time available without the threat of losing her job, and while it took us a few weeks to get used to each other's near-daily presence, she slowly became more and more relaxed around me and became invaluable when it came to dealing with the minutiae of my work. I am not ashamed to admit I shunted as much of the annoying tedium of running a business as I could her way, and as quickly as I could as well. But to my surprise, instead of complaining about it, as was her right, or at least as it was supposed to be in a better world, she took it on the chin and took over scheduling and taking calls. Naturally, that combined with the fact business was booming, due to the agreements I finally managed to hammer out with Rogue and Wakako, earned her a considerable raise, and so far she had not given me a reason to regret hiring her. Well, except for one minor annoyance. See, about 1 month into her employment, we had an unexpected break in the middle of the schedule due to a customer cancelling an operation. Or well, it was more along the lines of him getting cancelled by way of high-caliber round through the side of the cranium, but that was beside the point. The point, as it were, was that there were now 2 hours of planned intensive surgery gone with the wind, and no customer who could reasonably reschedule quickly enough that we could still make use of it, leaving us with an unplanned break for the day. So I invited her upstairs for a snack because I could find no actual reason not to. I have come to regret that decision immensely, because she and Mom hit it off instantly. And then, as if I was stuck in some kind of cruel fever dream, I got to listen to my mother start sharing stories about me with my employee, whom she had met mere minutes before, and who proceeded to commit the same heinous act upon her own child. Life was indeed a cruel, ruthless thing. Needless to say, this meant that Gloria had become something of a constant fixture in my life, both on and off of work, and that would have been fine if not for the fact I could sometimes catch her giving me pitying looks when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't egregious, but it did grate, no matter how illogical I knew the emotion to be. Catching myself, I shook it from my mind and gave the woman a lazy wave as she finished her drink and signed off for the day. Going upstairs to chat with my mother for a bit, as was their new custom, before going home. Thinking about stupid shit won't make it any less stupid. I told myself and decided to focus on something much more productive instead as I opened up the list of the most expensive and luxurious places in Night City. New Year's was coming around in a few days, and it has been a while since I took Rebecca out somewhere nice. 70, Chapter 70, New Year, New Me. Michael Magos Sobranov. We have reached La Lune Bleue safely, the synthetic voice of the AI avatar said as the car came to a stop. Thank you for using the Delamain Excelsior service. It was our pleasure, Del. I nodded and went to get out. Will you be fine finding a spot on your own? Of course, Mr. Sobranov. Rest assured, I will remain alert and prepared should you find yourself in need of a speedy exit. I couldn't stop the wry smile from worming its way across my face as I exited the car. Hiring out the sentient cab was a fun novelty at first, but it was kind of reassuring to know I had an armored escape waiting just around the corner if I got hit with anything interesting. With a playful flourish, I opened the opposite car door and offered my hand, my lady. Rebecca rolled her eyes as she got out, lightly hitting me in the shoulder. Gonk. And she didn't have to hop to do it this time. It took her only a month of thinking it over, but she ultimately caved before the lure of self-improvement and accepted a modest, by my standards anyway, series of body-wide modifications. The entirety of her skeleton had been reinforced with titanium, much of her musculature replaced with far more efficient artificial versions, alongside my most sophisticated subdermal ballistic weave to date. It wouldn't stop high-caliber rounds completely, but it would stop them from doing any real damage without repeated hits punching through first. All of these improvements naturally needed space, which meant she shot up a full foot in height, going from short to above average overnight. I got a lot of teasing material out of helping her relearn how to walk, and how to not break delicate things, now that her specifications had gotten a considerable all-around boost. And I managed all of this without adding unneeded bulk in the process. To top all of this off, I made sure to jam the cruelest, most efficient black ice into the back of her head, programmed to murder anyone who so much as considered hacking her in any harmful way. The fact I couldn't make it carte blanche was a bit annoying, but my cough protégé and her friend liked to do stupid pranks with her quick hacks, and frying her from inside out for that, just because I was being overprotective, was a bit much. It was a very close thing, though. Geez, Rebecca muttered, staring as the robocab drove away, and then let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh before looking back at me. Still can't believe you got Delamain to be our ride. I wanted to make it memorable. I chuckled, and I admit I was a bit curious about it. Him? Doesn't matter. Going to make a girl feel self-conscious at this point, Rebecca said wryly, but I immediately shot that line of thinking down. Don't worry about that. I have to splurge with all my money every once in a while, and splurging on you makes me happy. She immediately blushed and looked away. Stop being cute and let's go eat our overpriced dinner already. But of course, I drawled in amusement and offered her my hand, which she quickly took. The dress makes you look fantastic, by the way, just in case I forgot to mention it. And the blush returned full force. Yes, Mike, you did. 3 times. My eyebrows rose. How odd, I seem to have forgotten. And she did indeed look stunning, wearing a high-cut black dress that left most of her back open in a kind of less is more design sense, while still covering enough to remain decent. Her hair was let loose and was now a darker shade of green with deep red highlights. Admittedly, I may or may not have taken the liberty of evening out some minor details here and there while giving her improvements and ended up making her look just a tiny bit closer to perfection. Most would consider such behavior to be a touch forward, and yet where were the complaints? Chuckling at my own thoughts, I focused back on the present as we neared the restaurant, already bustling to the brim with rich corporate guests wanting to show off for their New Year's while pretending it was all in good fun, and a rare few others who were not quite on that level of rot, but still had enough money to celebrate in style. A potential deal-breaker, if not for the fact I managed to secure a seat at one of the more private balconies with a great view of the city through Rogue. Truly, knowing someone who knew someone who knew someone was the greatest social lubricant, after money. And being a multimillionaire, I had the money to spare and then some. The suited-up valet noticed us approach and straightened his back. Good evening and welcome to Bleu, honored guests. May I see your reservation? His voice was polite, but I noted a small bit of tension under it as he looked over Rebecca. Her tattoos were rather distinctive after all. But there was no point getting hung up about it, so I just ejected my personal link cable from my hand and offered it to the man, who quickly inserted it into a reader machine. The slight tension disappeared, and he inclined his head. "Welcome, Mr. Sobranov, Miss Carmine. Are you armed?" "No." I shook my head, having left my sidearm in the cab. "Of course." The man's eyes flashed before he nodded and spread an arm invitingly. "If you would allow me, I will show you to your table." I shot Rebecca a mildly amused warning look as she went to no doubt talk shit to him, and while she did grumble, we managed to silently follow the valet upstairs and to our reserved table. I wasn't quite wasteful enough to get us a completely private spot, but there was enough space between us and the other guests that, aside from a few curious glances, they didn't pay much attention to us. The valet placed a booklet on the table. "Here is tonight's itinerary. Please enjoy yourselves." He bowed and then left. The instant the man left hearing distance, Rebecca scowled. "Fucking asshole." "I did warn you," I point out in an amused voice. "Yeah, I get it." She pouts, "But I'm not just going to shit on my girls like that. They pulled me out of a bad spot. I'm not going to forget them just because it's more convenient." "Hey, it's not like I mind. Nor would they really if you decided to change up, or so I believe anyway." I shrugged with a smirk, just pointing out what's practical. She made a face while mouthing my words back at me, to which I just chuckled and looked around, finding no cautious, fearful stares directed my way. Still, feels weird not to be the one drawing all the attention for once. "It's what happens when you decide to look like an actual person." She gave me a crooked grin and playfully rubbed her chin. "Still, now that you mention it, I kinda miss the Deathmore." "The Deathmore is still there, I assure you." I smirked, showing the rows of teeth under the facsimile of humanity. It was odd having skin again, or at least the closest approximation of it anyway. I could definitely feel a lot more, and part of it felt liberating, but it also reminded me of times part of me wanted to forget, and the more intelligent one knew I never should. Of course, I wasn't exactly allowed to choose the look myself because God forbid I have agency in my own home. Mom, Misty, and Becca had way too much fun teasing me about it, but I did have to admit their ultimate choice was pretty good-looking. Not that I would ever admit it out loud, of course. I gave myself a sharp, hawkish face, pulled back short black hair, and a neatly trimmed full beard. Every young man wanted a beard, and I would weather all the teasing necessary to keep it. My eyes remained gold, and I decided to keep my left on full display instead of masking the scanner suite with a lens. I had to keep at least some of my preferred uncanny valley effect somehow. My limbs remained fully cybernetic though, as putting skin on them felt more tedious than I could be bothered with, and cybernetic limbs were far more common than a cybernetic everything. Kind of a shame I couldn't wear my mechadendrites. I most assuredly did not whine at the lack of weight on my back. I feel naked without them. "It would look pretty weird." Rebecca bobs her head. "So going to give them up now?" she asked teasingly. "Hell no." I huffed. "I'll just take off my skin whenever I don't need it." She failed to contain a snort. "You know, in any other context, that would be fucking terrifying." "Ah, but Becca." I leaned forward and smirked. "I am terrifying." She gave me a deadpan before hugging herself and pretending to shiver. "Oh no." While we were talking, the waiters started bringing out the food-setting plates of no doubt impossible to pronounce finger foods before us and leaving without a word. "What's this?" Rebecca frowned, poking the tiny portion. She looked up at me. "You sure this is actual food?" "We are here for a 7-course meal, Becca." I shook my head. "They come in stages." She seemed to understand before once more frowning. "But why though?" I did do some actual research about this in advance." I perked up slightly. "See, back when Europe still had their nobility, they needed a way to be decadent little shits and get in as much flavor as possible without making themselves barf like pigs. And thus, the spaced-out bite-sized portions." "Huh." She blinked and actually took a bite before quickly wolfing down the rest. For all the ostentation and rumors about all of it just being a show, the food was in fact pretty fucking good. And thankfully, just as organic as advertised. It would have been really unfortunate if the business wound up exploded after they made me pay exorbitant prices with false advertising after all. 2 hours passed like this, with the two US just chatting and enjoying each other's presence between short but gloriously delicious nomming breaks, making a point not to talk about business stuff for once and just waffle on about our hobbies. And the latest Bushido episode, because of course something we started as an ironic tradition turned into an actual habit without me noticing. The waiters brought the desserts to top everything off, and the two of us leaned back into our seats. Way to show me I don't know shit. Rebecca sighed as she stared longingly at her now empty plate. Suddenly her eyes snapped towards me, but I was quicker than that, so all she got to see was me tossing the tiny cake into my mouth. Rude. She pretend sniffed. Of course, that only made me exaggerate my chewing before I stuck my tongue out. You snooze, you lose. She tossed the little booklet at my head, only for me to grab it and put it back down on the table while giving her an unimpressed stare. She just cheekily smirked up at me, and we settled into a comfortable silence as she started looking over the guests, seemingly deep in thought. Feels like a whole-ass different world up here. She muttered, "It's all the same once you get into the meat of it." I feigned disinterest. "It does look prettier, though, that much is for sure." "Ha!" She huffed in amusement. "Definitely not my kind of place." Her look turned odd then as she smiled up at me. "You're sure moving up in the world, eh, Mike?" "As anyone should." I nodded firmly, "though you make it sound like a bad thing." She paused and quickly shook her head. "Ah, forget about it. I'm just being a gonk thinking about stupid shit." "Oh?" I pressed teasingly. "Care to enlighten me?" "You'll just think I'm being dumb." She pouted. "Ah, I see where this is going. You know, you don't have to compare yourself to me like that." "That obvious, huh?" She grumbled briefly before clamping down on that and giving me a wry look. "Thought you were one of us at first, but then you went and got an actual job. And it doesn't require me to risk my life for almost no long-term gain. Will wonders ever cease?" I returned in an equally peppy tone. "Speaking of, you do know you don't have to go and risk your life like that anymore, right? All my chooms are there?" She shrugged before pointing at herself. "I ain't leaving them like that. Becca is ride or die." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "Also, girls got to put food on the table somehow." "No, you don't." She seemed momentarily blindsided by this, but recovered quickly. "Oh, what's this?" She smirked teasingly, leaning in and batting her eyelashes. "Looking to wife me up already? Trying to get a reaction out of me, hmm? Two can play that game?" I quirked an eyebrow. "Shall I go fetch the ring?" "Bois!" She startled and sputtered. "What, you—" She took a deep breath and narrowed her eyes up at me. "Got me again." She grumbled. It was funny how she thought I was joking. But any further conversation was cut off as all of the visible sky was overtaken by colorful explosions. Fireworks going off with such a sudden intensity, I was momentarily afraid someone had set off a bomb. "Already?" I blinked as I stood up to get a better view. "Coming up here was worth it just for the view," Rebecca whispered, suddenly next to me. We stood there for a few seconds, just basking in the display, before I lost interest in mere pyrotechnics and made her look up at me, stealing a quick kiss in the process while giving her a small wink. For whatever reason, that little bit of teasing made her look away while leaning into me. We stayed like that for a while. Of course, it wouldn't be a proper night without someone deciding to butt their head into our business. And a very drunk young man dressed in an obvious hand-me-down suit stumbled over to us while his chooms followed after him with morbid curiosity in their eyes. "Hey, big guy," he slurred toward me. "How much for the joy toy there?" Fortunately, I was hoping for something like this. Rebecca and I shared a quick look, mirror grins spreading on our faces as we turned to the evening's winner, and both punched him straight in the face. "Woo-hoo! Floor it, Dell," Rebecca hollered semi-drunkenly as the pursuing Corpsec car crashed behind us, erupting into a glorious explosion of biogas. "Of course, Ms. Carmine." The AI calmly acquiesced, zooming across the streets and leaving our pursuers in the dust. "Happy New Year's, motherfuckers," I cheered at the explosion before ducking back from the window, a wide grin on my face. Now those were some proper fireworks. In all the excitement, I completely failed to notice Rebecca before she was already on me, and I quickly reciprocated the moment my brain caught up. But of course, the world remained ever cruel. "Apologies, dear customers, but please refrain while in the vehicle." Rebecca paused, expression twisting from haze to utterly furious. "Really, Dell?" she hissed. "Really?" "Company policy, I'm afraid, Ms. Carmine." She took in a deep, sharp breath before rolling off me and back into her seat and groaned, "Fucking fine." "Thank you for your understanding." I stared into the blank face of the AI avatar and came to a stark realization. The clones were right. The only good clanker was a dead clanker.